Yeah, that was actually super helpful. He did that.
Who's gonna come out? I mean, I'm making on think that this thing has been around for a while.
Same view that this has here also.
Computer, you take tools on, fine.
I think it from stuff. It's
Like a Nokia phone. Yeah.
that is so. Sorry. You were silent.
Yeah.
Sorry for your loss.
This
Your pending season.
is so sad. So sad. 2013. Oh no, something.
Yeah, but also.
I think probably more productive is whatever you work on.
Don't worry.
Sometimes highlighting for that. Whatever it is that you're working on.
Yeah. It's just that. Good for you. Actually bring it. I have to already. 5 minutes coaching disease. High five, fist down, hugs.
Justin, is there any way to get more brightness in here?
Blue lighting.
That's a good thing. Well, when it comes to vegetables, okay.
Okay.
It's been a lot better. It's got a simple offer, middle edge basically. Yeah.
Pretty soon.
Gotta get those checklists right. Sometimes, you know. You know what it's like. Look at them. I got back. Look at Gazelle still though, you know. Pounds all over the place.
So we got a kind of similar panel where the green has a little bit. We got like all hanging out there with the good species. We got this. Johnny judging for
Oh, and check the security. What? Yeah.
Trying to harbor this.
Like, why don't we do that?
I was trying to use this. Why?
Talking about the site conventions? Talking about Northwestern site conventions? Yes. Yeah. See, when we steal cars, we're so fun about it. Yeah, we got that's what it's there for.
Do you have to sit here and work it, or do you want me to? No, I can sit here. Yeah, thank you. It's supposed to. Yeah. Yeah. Clearly, I think it's supposed to be.
Let's start.
I don't need time to decide.
We have.
Yeah, we do.
1, 2, 3. Yeah. We actually have like kind of weird 70%.
That is fun.
That's you.
You just reply back, you know.
So, what are we waiting for? Oh, got it. I feel important. Sit here, straight.
watch this today. We good? Yes. All right. Hey! It's time for the speaking.
We still have
Did you add them?
honest mistake. We didn't think you did it.
Well.
Turns out you were wrong.
I don't know. Stuff on third Friday. And
We're good. Awesome.
Playing the United States federal government making legal nearly all marijuana prohibited controlled substances acting in the United States advanced word of the war on drugs, it's an active failure that magnifies social problem skills and uptaking global violence and widespread organized crime. DPA 11. This penal verse was built despite the corporation's mental torture made war. It's created in poverty, racial disparities, prison, overcrowding, eroded liberties, debt, prohibition on marijuana is empowered by syndicates, global revenue streams, 22 million. This is now a priority revenue source for organized crime prohibition. Is empowered extremist violence, even regime enforcement can increase violence by destabilizing marketing, trading, power vacuums review of more than 300 cents found that when police crack down, the result is an increase in violence escalation. Mexico has led to the death of tens of thousands. U.S. may needs an exit strategy. This kind of recommends any double marijuana prohibition. Organized crime undermines statement out the use of force paraphernalia. Much well dictionary criminal rights Muslims and Muslim states construction. This is evidence in the fragile state. One of the most important aspects of the TNC. The evidence has only corrupted it is by corrupting and compromising it is organized crime. Promotes the state's capacity to come. For the common good person will loss legitimacy and generates ability to remain in power. Use of weapon definitions to use to consist of basically use of force. It also exports violence globally and undercuts democracy. Frankly, on 12, exporting violent weaknesses primarily because government policies are worldwide. Consumer corruption is all on the production end, and that's when you succeed now. Trusting the leaders have reason to use policies that cover control accountability. Rule of law, we have compromised democracy by accusing one leader pushes production to another. Marijuana will leave less scope. Officials will lose this first thing come out of our democracy. Will be strengthened the development decrease first and put it out as these are enterprise doctors to decrease by system by dark production nations. Which one? Yeah, that's you can only do our best to take into consideration the cost. To address damage caused by control policies, only legalization needed for worldwide excess drug criminality. It erodes the statement out there and use of force because of escalating violence and private contractor use HOBS and 10.3. The anti will go with increase the ones and the anti-use of countermeasures for the reflects on the danger before they demonstrate the drug organization that from directly charged the United States only losing its venom but not the use of words means to direct the charge but not the state is effectively outworking its but not by creating the financial circle of the negative to capacity of internal increase in spending counter recovery not matched by oversight the unlikely the same problem would be with season birds and Afghanistan and Iraq will be repeated. Our cost of the probation strictly maintained by the U.S. and operations by trying to make good seasons and time for resources to be diverse and alternative approaches that should allow the U.S. and other countries moving into the issue go war drugs and secrets as public health issue would work against the interests of the teams that seek the set of COVID changes in the extinction ban for all 99 that will throw global territories by the same different time which are monopoly of both and the public of the effect of the average of the transmitted and the result is chemical bionuclear weapons and I think with the nuclear weapon will be used the result will be the Stone Age today. Many will find it easier than transaction advantage attention direct power people may find organizations unless the chemical organizations may not be able to keep the peace that will cause the violence will break down. A monopoly of force keep resilient democratic peace mass skills 11. The absence of accountability representation of peaceful environmental lifetime and the making coalitions preventing interstate violence through democratic regimes. Some regimes are able to build peace agreements that help insurance rights when the state lose monopoly of course and forces the assumption because irrelevant when security boards are not having to say there may be no return. Increasing presence undermines the relative monopoly, intervenes ability to strengthen international coalitions, markets promote peace and democracy, self-war for outcasts, signaling resolution, constitutional alliance, integrity. 14, the citizens of the democratic republic will have to take over the market of worldwide democracy and peace agreement. Existing both conditions are likely to bring about their peaceful without democratic institutions. There is simple agreement that the absence of war between democratic states comes as close to anything that's we have to an empirical law and international relations. Democracies rarely initiate wars, risking war between markets that follow over the past 2 centuries. Number of studies found confirmation of the neighborhood relationships between the level of vaccine probability of the outcome of conflict. So, democratic regimes have a high risk of conflict, internal wars, and democracies are less lethal. First, the explanation holds that the cultural practices that prevent peaceful relations without trying to balance states, actualize the message of that encourage companies and democratic institutions to trade by other bodies, which would ensure that citizens are taken into account and part of their culture words like the end of the decision capital democracy signal. Result rights have an incentive to back down democracies. However, audience counts that into re-election pressures make them more careful and select the words that they are likely to win. The possibility of occupation is not certain for democratic citizens for autocratic countries, since methods of occupation have to be shared between those who bear the cost. Explicit CSA removal and subsequent state regulations key to end punitive drug policy while breaking the programs and South use make believe because of the epidemic of others. Now, this is the global reference for use more hard policy the encouragement governments to expand with legal regulation of marijuana. There are less punitive approaches to use contain the forefront of reformation by many policies within its donation use or reformance policies from prohibition to regulation does see that the drugs such as marijuana included this gains insufficient are calling on use to do more than to grow momentum to research marijuana. A lot of the U.S. is work training to ensure that the country's not converging approach of repressing experimentation in ways experimenting with legal regulations will redeem our image internationally where regulations because the scope of the market is created by use of English steps for the legality of the international community could reach against its federal control. Policy marijuana would likely be a marijuana represents a single mechanism to enter into experimentation use, relatively their influence transfers can offer prohibited policies from majority calling converts that use lead to call for more tolerant policies majority, and that may also follow complete reformation is too aggressive to seize against bureaucracy. A more moderate piecemeal approach connected to catalysts and view it as serious than the federal government must remove marijuana from the term and take steps until they're assistance governments we control the regions dominated by church groups. These groups would lose a major source of funding. The marijuana is an actual mechanism that they can charge reform that to adopt no effective reforms of prohibition which can be useful. Capitalism is about removing marijuana from the list of federally banned substances and exchange for policies that are effective. Statutory changes key to eliminate prohibition. CSA shows access given 14. Marijuana does not work in CSA. Any scheduling is pressure. That's the same level it's not with the symbolic. The effects of ratification would have come to advance reform. That time has passed, but there are a lot of substances of the change for the law, not symbolism nor half measures, nor changing around with the CSA over the periods of action. That's the following marijuana is rescheduled the VA then attempts to make all marijuana act subject to regulatory issues and next reduce that. Mama will be after 2016 when the state says no practical regulatory reform became the roll back in the Texas right now. I will kill you down. It's not like this change in the central state for all this means remove marijuana from the CSA. Advantage 2 is innovation. Scenario 1 decentralization. CSA removal encouraging state innovation. Sector 12. Decentralization roads innovation where states are more optimal about the user for the boss only gives the friends one chance for some doesn't need to build states for the direct one of the issue but it is always ready for spend or reduce term and invigorates more programs spills over beyond our policy but acting on marijuana is key create 13 coal attempt to bring in search rights remains to be found the chemical list one of the national maybe get the border county the states to their own campus multiple zone that takes many further to pass rate the policy search chemical immigration and healthcare the president's model globally after 11 according to some illegal influence get up the US level on this way other many and other countries taking expensive use of board residents the reference use persons now becoming many Jersey to prefer after the education similar to those great practice has been most pronounced in areas of constitutionalism. There is merit to observation of the U.S. as an exporter of jurisprudence, ideas, data available in the citation U.S. authority, and journalists increasing critical things sufficient to account to the U.S. for the fund and communication of raise many court decisions fingertips to notice. Decentralization is key to sustained tech innovation allows diversification to rest on one any take looks and take right tripping under which will generate most as the innovation you start to only deviation first have no preferences in the sector second only more less in this hard comfortable bureaucracy reasonably is indication of civil authority level show motivation with political control from this background proving the sacred state one less than not truly confident in the guns, why would it be decentralized structurally to a superior comfort, multiple centers of authority, allocate resources, reducing the chances of the wrong policies, relationships, growth, policy diversification, the technologies of under principle, authority, diversification, innovation, policy discussion, as soon as regional governments be less confident, first regional governments in local laws, geographical leadership, for investment, second, even though the government's approach to interest group capture, autonomy can blend biases, integration, group studies, and roots to protect more likely to push investments that increase the size of high-tech and have a much bigger global rate, increasing incentives to invest in decentralized structures for months, as they selecting inferior revolutionary, scenario choose the industry, advance, tap it down, non-enforceable drives uncertainty, risk averse investment, funding, anger, him, 1044, legal canvas, the industry, the federal, the federal, good potential investor interest rates, I introduce these uncertainties because right, the federal prohibition depending on the White House, agent situation, Canada, the demonstrate the data, or able dispensary, DA, not given any reason the risk makes investors skittish, status on the books, prohibits, still not a state legalization, Firestone 14, the law uses spelling marijuana, on the books, reason that some of the legal or clinical states that I can usually before already been in the record, recognize that's in the middle, not certainly forward, all the any states are on the right, but on that penalty, is going to say, which all by yours, please, penalty, in order to state to have sufficiently robust to change innovation models, change and interpret the data requires on because federal action, stronger investment costs industry growth, leader 10 take the rate of this very good that is the line of the the industry was huge from the senior knowledge with the outside investment accident that goes to industry gravity shows that go many bits of office where people don't treat with the conception needs of a lot of academic business have less excellent payroll, growth and innovation are flatlining legalization spills over TCS 14 use economies that have rough years innovation falling on to become more than as the first industries need to come out of divorce with the heavy legalization people with absolute legal section of the business open opportunities like opportunity this opportunity are no longer covered with the basic place build how makes cities that means creating the business and things like that voicing the taxpayer people who would then instruct directly with the backspace and have trouble finding work on a wall like they have a public system drive into the damage policy for 20 years that sustains innovation but requires a strong investment funding vector 14 innovations to be issued through delivering new products to the market that seeing an industry spend deliver that was opportunities for investors that are different because one work with the industry is the best level. The same does for level to service your operation with something raised idea, local place application, rights by marketing, merchant servicing, Korea, late down to streets, industry price, the marijuana legislation of the without uses for medicine, the industrial sector, many others really hard tonight to the center, could be on board market globally, watching new innovation, the effects of global war, James 14, can happen again, this raise that prepares from globalization, independence, been war, caused by the absolute script, damage for Charlie, having global leverage, by winnable, learning, expansion, fortunes, reemerging, the economy, technology, power, use, violence, and so many actions, situation, we are getting to problem, that just matters, trouble, generate uncertainty, no one would know what they lost for this, there's too much world, I see no that it may be fatal, innovation, sustain, try to keep up coping with all global challenges, barter, cakes, other concepts, and third, right, our battle, sustainable, the opportunity for technology, just to save us global population, prime number, turning that nation, we can just throw world events history, and then we're breaking out from the rainforest against how rapidly economic opportunities, revolution, trips, to the beings, come up from economic growth, global stability, found that there is much for all this factor, right, 2 days, receive limits, global days, starting around the concentration, greenhouse gas, economy, the biodiversity, keeping them thread, all these recurring innovation stories, just these by human gas, the bonus of the words, these poverty, environmental degradation. Mark Barker and environmental degradation.
Okay. Marijuana legalization key to sustain strong investment in technology, and then that is key to sort of tech innovation. What specific tech innovations will marijuana spur?
Our argument isn't that like the plant itself is the tech; it's that it revitalizes the economy by creating investment in ancillary.
So the only linkage to tech innovation is the state economies.
No, you know, as the first half of the advantage, there's also a federalism component.
Okay, yeah, I get that. You're talking about two different kinds of states. There's address references about sort of international states need to have decentered ways of funding sort of innovative technologies. How does this assume industries like biotechnology, where the vast amount of money comes from corporations, not government investments? Why are those necessary for innovations in those industries?
Well, our argument is that a limited state role is key to the path-breaking tech development. So while that may be true for biotech, continued innovation requires a scale down.
Innovation in what? Like what industries have you been talking about?
So we've isolated things like the service sector as well.
The service sector. What kinds of innovations in the service sector?
It's hard to say exactly because the point is that it's
hard to say. What we
also say energy and material science.
Energy. So that state needs a hands-off approach for energy to succeed.
We need a decentralized, less federal government.
Would a country like Mexico adopt the decentralized approach, even though the Mexican energy corporations are based mostly off of state funding?
Our argument for innovation is U.S. market is key.
Also, tax reform?
Why is the U.S. Economy key to global sort of federalism?
To global federal,
or to, I guess, global economic model.
I don't know whether you're asking this in the context of federalism or not. The argument for the second half of the advantage isn't that other states will model U.S. decentralization in that regard. It's just that U.S. tech development through the industries.
The first part, though, that there's a notion that other countries will model the United States court system. Why is that true?
Yeah, our apt evidence says that we're the most cited country because our jurisprudence is seen as influential.
Why is it seen as influential and by whom?
Because we were the first to develop a federalized state system.
We were the first to develop a literally state system. That's why the countries are still looking at us, because they're like, man, they sure did it right back in the day. We really got to get there. Like,
our apt evidence is a criticism of the way you're setting it up, that people don't look to the U.S. legal system anymore. It says the U.S. still has a lot of influence, and that others look to our.
The Hybris card says that markets promote peace and democracy. This is the Kantian peace theory. How does this explain the Cargill War as the continuation of our?
We say democratic peace theory.
Peace theory.
Same thing. Doesn't matter.
No, you're like dragging a whole lot of conceptual.
How does this explain the Cargill War, the continuation war, or the Turkish invasion of Cyprus in the 1970s?
The Cargill War didn't really escalate past, a certain level.
It was still a war. This evidence says wars are going away. How does that explain that?
Yeah, it makes a statistical claim that war is less likely to escalate and is less likely to be initiated between democracies.
War is less likely to escalate, but it's still going to happen a lot? That's the argument we have?
I mean, our claim isn't that all states get along perfectly after the act. It's that there are better democratic governance structures that reduce the incidence of conflict.
Paul, Lincoln, Sharon, Becca, could use you potentially on finals panels. Yes, yes.
Sure. Only me so.
Awesome, thank you.
Man, I'm so.
Oh no, I think I only replied to one person. I totally just gave it to
I'll bet it and then decide whether it's good enough to their doing.
Almost certainly not.
I told you how I didn't want to. And I was like, wait, are you
And
I don't know.
one up. Are we ever? Is that what the advantage are called?
Yeah, or well, innovation is the second one, is sort of the non-federal part.
Innovation. Shall we? Are we good? Y'all good?
Give me 1 second.
It's.
Hey.
Legalization is a reform of the name of neoliberalism. Their interpretation and legal laws about the institution they oppose is better to legal law placing for accessible war drugs and extension neoliberal capital. Paying 99 most processing commodity all rebellion will be reduced to the image of rebellion and simulation where reform becomes an impossibility of partial media amelioration of society that will be reformed into the means of sustaining power by the quantity against legalization of the world. But all reforms be against the turn into a means control makes us spawn committing legalization cannabis will soon be the ancient like any other legal type drugging wars no longer so profitable. The old economic war takes its place and the drug war is almost pure from the neoliberal standards government has given up so much power to corporations by justice into the war on drugs to constitute the health capital itself. The legalization would be so clearly be doomed for the failure for deep infrastructure holdings global capital to not be reformed. The war on drugs is going to go on nature. There's no interest in overcoming the stupidity of laws and it seems to be nothing to overcome. After that foreign decisions are made in response to American leadership's the height of affect and narcissism not only wrong because the US be blamed for every failure. Turns the case to minor in 13 dance contains no diagnosis for narcissistic quality disorder, but today it should have been an which to expand political science and finance. So we can't study your job again. People to in fact about us, the attempt to war and as a failure. American leadership is an admission that he hits every time and adverse event occurs anywhere in powerful fantasy with in the same place is reported events in parts of one top any event becomes a test of American leadership within that moment there's literally room left for nations acting making choices about their own future. When we ought not be surprised that Egypt turn around and present the ignorance American acceptance consumption of narcissism so widespread that all politics may be focused into what's up to the eye was on most of the morning leaders who believes the US can retreat from the hold of leadership of the external arrogance and humility the latter qualities would be an effective therapy about element disordering the nations thinking about responsibilities and capacities. Contemporary governmentality functions by lessening state regulation by increasing responsibilization where humans are pushed to conduct themselves in their usage of drugs in ways that are purely rational, calculated, drone and 13 massive and gigantic extend the neoliberalization of the projection of subject to be the state. The state of neoliberalization favors rational towards market capitalism by creating conditions that reinforce a particular context. Neoliberalization that has not led to the degradation of state poverty, implicit reform of state government. The state become the logo through which neoliberalism exists through the active support of the state. Neoliberalism is in need of a state that practices depoliticized the population through survival strategies which encourage people are treated as reserves of human capital. Neoliberalization of the state consists of achieving the way states justify their existence through the protection of markets by value entities that reserve profits out of naturally sourced by bringing the ecological to the economical through gratification ground down the human anthropology of homo economic society. We should not think of disciplinary society to replace society, sovereignty, and exploit a complex humatic combination extinction. Robinson and 14 cars of the global price are found in accumulation and contribution to state power present in one place and remember the price with the system to our press regular transnational sort of accumulation. Global prices are recurring every 10 years. The system of prices have evolved replaced by entirely new systems. There are regional constituted events set down social, political, ecological, as well as existential. The legitimacy of the system to all the questions by perhaps buildings and connect and all these dimensions is with climate change and the appendix lots of centralized agricultural threatening the ability of people to survive with ecological civilization systems, fast tracing the ecological limits of residential global capitalism, and friends, the 6 times in their planet paradox, to maintaining our system, both our experience, with our experience, virtual negation, 3 are at 10 points of the magnitude of the means of sometimes to computerized wars, drones, response to change the face of organic capitalism is reaching the limits of expansion capitalism must continue to better capital, that's the surplus population alienated from the productive economy subject to sophisticated control, destruction, prison, energy, limited, immigrant detention, complex, omnipresent, military identification, the transnational state apparatus, and not be able to put a hand on the spread of WPM military makes it hard to remember systems, not over a stable political authority, the ultra right is inserted and used of reactionary political power with transnational organized privileged sectors such as white workers and military nationalization, homophobia, racist mobilization, 21st century fashion normalizing, glamorizes warfare, terrorist assassination, dominations, just say no to problematize the function of political neoliberals and the idea of 12 years, starting out when we need to retrace the politicization of the political issue that wide recognition of some specific concerns and intended access to political problems rather than publishing the world and state. I think it's more appropriate to ask first how globalization has come to exist issues such as crime, give us contradictory entries to understand these types of legislative contemporary governments is not limited to changing state power, it's protection all of the trajectories of form of governance, the idea of starting from globalization is not limited to explain the daily function, how to when we direct our research globalization is provides a different way of going out there without going around to explain governance, identify the world of rationality, explain the conventional government, extending the controversies in the rationality of political action, devise the general analytical political ideas that may form the programs of government not only just by custody by practice, techniques of intervention, war drugs, organized projects which identify alien others as an existential threat. This threat inflation enables us to displace the violence of like capitalist responsibility and imagine outside recreating that violence with housing, violent and analysis police and organized crime, we can observe how multi-planet function as a vehicle for repressive racist governance when colonization to democracies loading these activities in single category market. March as organized crime creates a sense of threat that are far more ominous and substantial aliens become immigrants are particularly successful, susceptible to more panics and unattainable concepts which are organized crime and constitute a particular form of othering, excluding communities become covert and the organized criminal. So devils presented as an external threat, even though organized criminality is ultimately expressed in local trading networks. Organized crime is described by engineering moral panic suggested probably capitalism man-made from another essentially alien and hostile place. The state monopoly of violence is over, wolf and center folding trades override the state monopoly of force and privatization of violence with warlords, military rebel, paramilitary groups, gangs, organized crime, and governments are no longer capable of guaranteeing law and order. The police and military to be or too corrupt and unwilling economic power might be lower, quickly transform their military powers reverse of the centuries old state monopoly and undisputed national identity no longer exists. National boundaries are broken down to globalization. Many active states operate outside the logic of territoriality. The state is being empty to some of its fragile family states like the means to deal effectively. PMCs are totally out of our control. Shot 4 issues have grown well beyond contracts played by the U.S. Wars have changed the landscape elsewhere, giving rise to massive multinational PMCs also legitimating this global energy at revenue over $100 billion a year and are not closing up shop just because the U.S. wars are ending. Enterprise have shifted their focus on the lucrative regions reflexes on the side of $529 million deal with the UAE. IMC's constitutes some of the largest private borders have growing presence in Latin America, the Middle East, Asia, Africa. G4S alone operates in over 125 countries domestically or forced by the U.S. literal to regulate the global PMC industry. The global PMC industry. The United States is no longer the only, even the primary consumer for private security contractors. GPT theory is wrong. We're seeing analysis 2K. Scholars have written policy theory possible here to enhance the time quality for from their work, but 5 acres against little and white high confidence result. If you need the most relaxed scientific statements scientific test validity, it is impossible to assign metrics to relative variance, polarity, relative power balance. There's no commonly accepted definition. Almost every statement will have too much wiggle room to be tested. Controversy rate over definition of deterrence. Democratic common theories are built on idealization, rational amounts far around reality, but implicitly theories and context do not exist. And equal differences in interpretation lead to widely varying views of the model definition could be resolved through so fine and difficult, it's not impossible to construct large enough samples of statistical analysis variation about time and complexity the likelihood of general theory extraordinarily low statistical and personal cost independent cases, but that is impossible. All cues not from the Lord from experience. People do not their piece in order to try to explain without understanding context in which they were formulated. Social science requires empirical variance under specified boundary conditions. Open system, assuming influenced by external stimuli, causal mechanisms of all predictions. Open system is essentially impossible. DPT underreports certain kind of violence and ignores how democratization itself creates violence. The lowest system variables and attributes. Innovation. U.S. federalism as a global model is a means of extending neoliberal power worldwide. The failure of this model also breaks the power of neoliberal economic restructuring and clears space for alternatives against it. 13 federalism includes 2 important constitutional mainstream ideas. One hand federalism means to prove the amnesty within the nation state. On the other hand, federalism provides the answer to control the power and protect minorities. These have been used and perverted by neoliberals to establish kind of economic global federalism as an instrument to extract capital in new space and new markets. Nation state is sacrificed the constitution in order to articulate substantial economic global constitution to convert the world to trade areas big as wise planet economic global federalism has extended global economic finance markets in which we are now looking pointing out the opposites as subsidiarity has been seriously perverted by global federalism used as a pattern to establish global free trade for financial markets, not for persons or rights, using it only global federalism using only as a vehicle to improve global capitalism, not the degradation of the environment or supervision or control over economic power. Global federalism wants us to think the regulation of the economies and attack the liberty of the people. Global federalism does not act as a limited power but a political economic organization that ensures the domination of a few neoliberals means world war without rules of nations that can establish global economical federalism, establish an unruled global market nation states or something from deconstitutionalization that they think themselves are legitimating the government's trying to rule the world. Goldman Sachs rules the world. Legalization reduces at best a $35 billion industry for 14 in all 50 states. Legalized marijuana, federal government and prohibition marijuana industry would be worth $35 billion in just 6 years. Now the U.S. GDP is 16.8 trillion, which means they translate to roughly 0.2% effective GDP. This Google 5 minutes ago. This is that's 1/7 of the margin of error in BEA GDP called revision estimates, which means they don't affect perception, which is their totally to their impact. 5, 30, and 14 BEA releases multiple estimates of each quarter GDP revisions are often substantial average absolute change for third real-time estimates to be refined revisions in nearly 1.5 percentage point. 0 critical support for economic decline causing more ill interior 6 this is not a component to restriction of recession statistically related forceful action by the president fewer than half their tests. This association statistically significant only for 1 4 tests, which is and this is with the weakest possible standard. Democrat leaders are unlikely to initiate a crisis when they were between office. Some find that contrary to divergent if they are president is more likely to be forced when it's probably recuperating time. American concludes that the state of the American economy does not influence others. Initiation of crises leads to Davis conclude that conflict initiating behavior of 18 industrialized democracies is unrelated to either economic conditions. Innovation impact is a joke. Innovation marijuana obviously doesn't equal innovation. Things like material science is so stupid. Also, most basic science research is funded by the sexualized government, which they necessarily undermine interdependence thesis is wrong. Temporal computer dyadic factors. In 14, analyzing trade complicated, they found that trade flows will reduce conflict. Their model failed to take 3 things. That's why possible to peace comes straight around and the other way around. Look, we want to start the export business in 6 weeks. 4 second conflict behavior exempts network effects in France and Germany are peace chances are Belgium and Germany will be too. And so the likely.
So if the thesis of your Lima card is true, why do foreign courts bother citing U.S. precedent?
Just because they cite it doesn't mean they model and decide how to constitute their own government around the U.S. model, right? Citation and remaking government in the image of are totally different.
And that continual mimicry, which is our criticism, that doesn't exist.
Is the alt conditional?
No.
Okay. Where does the card advocate a just say no approach? I read this card as saying we need to problematize.
I mean, that was obviously sort of a metaphor / joke.
Why is
The
it
alternative is to
metaphor?
reject
It has
sort of
nothing to do with-
function and process of biopolitical neoliberalization that we say is like a
Why does
one
that
to see it
require
thing.
a just say no approach? Why can't we problematize?
Well, A, because we're impacting a lot of segments of the affirmative. B, because our problematization requires a step back from action in terms of state politics, which is our Gironin card.
Why does
And
a
that's,
step back require just say no?
I'm not sure I understand your question at this point.
Why does a step
just-
back to analyze the broader systems require a just say no approach?
Are you saying just say no is evil? Because whatever, man.
Okay.
Just say no to the
your
Who's
Woodlands
understanding
segment says is talking about moral panics and demands for increased police involvement. We say that the police shouldn't be able to lock people up for drugs. How is that an accurate description of the
Because you also then identify organized sectors of crime that you claim are undermining the global stability of the world,
Yeah,
which is a
because-
much larger.
your card about demanding police crackdowns applicable is there are all causes?
No, you identify
Shifts
crime
the
as a
location of
criminal-
policing from a local to an international question. It's not just
Your
deviance. it's the
wolf
organized
evidence is from naturalnews.com. What's that?
What?
Your wolf evidence is from naturalnews.com. What's that?
really credible website.
So good.
Okay. Why mention neoliberal bad impacts about extinction being inevitable linked to Bernstein?
Why would they?
Because Bernstein says theories of IR that have predictive and scientific value fail. And you read a
Our
card that
argument
says
is based on
extinction is structural.
environmental analysis and economic analysis, which are kind of distinct from the questions of
So if it's
IR.
about the environment or the economy, it gets a free pass from Bernstein. You'll spot that?
No.
Okay, then why doesn't it?
I mean, that's
impact
one
the
distinction.
first?
Also, our argument is a sort of internal critique as well. You fail your own scientific standards for analysis. Our
You're
argument
not
is that
answering
is
the
why.
question, dude. Why doesn't
No, no,
your
it's an
temporary
evidence.
impact also lead to
If
Bernstein?
we accept your standard for determining truth, you are wrong.
I
However-
understand why you think it applies to the app. I'm asking why you don't think it applies to your impact too.
However, we think that is a bad standard for truth, which is the second claim that I think.
Doesn't like the impact because it's supported by independent studies that aren't making the same types
Okay,
of
so as
claims
long
that
as
you
it's independent studies, it doesn't.
No.
Gotcha.
no,
independent from your kind.
misinterpreting
So
what we're saying drastically.
I have another question. So how does the just say no approach or problematizing U.S. narcissism address other populations wanting U.S. material living standards?
Why does everyone want to be like this?
Our argument.
Why
is-
U.S.? Why not
No.
Norway, which is way cooler than the U.S.?
So like Finland, their tax
One
policy
of
is
those
awesome.
social welfare in my God.
Okay, great.
Where's
I really like I do something else. Yeah. What is national.com?
Oh, dude, this is totally dope.
Oh, they're just hosting it.
Cleveland Center for Democratic Control of Armed Forces.
Typical national news is saying. Yeah.
All right, well, that's a good answer.
I'm done.
How much is your type of decent? How much do you use?
Done the 840. So.
Can I see the band key?
Sure.
I went to I went to Goodwill yesterday. Yeah, one of
You got water?
I would not like it.
Okay. We're missing bread. You said it. You did.
Hey, Alice.
So,
Yeah. Primarily, sorry. I don't know if we should do that. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my friends, you look really happy right now. I do.
Right, that's a good one. Okay, innovation, war on drugs, the king.
Sorry, I was listening.
Innovation, war on drugs, the K. Practice those listening skills.
That's right, it doesn't work. It doesn't.
Turn out.
Which I literally, I'm so sorry. I'm like,
Yeah, innovation, war on drugs, the K. The first argument consists with the report of the one Act evidence and against the export of the global model that means other critical to the United States will say this model is successful. The press evidence and against the result of more effective investment that changes the way investment strategies work and result in more successful innovation. This argument is successful case for a free trade argument is that free trade is a good idea. Group the question of whether or not we solve it doesn't assume better technology to increase competitiveness. Argument is also about slow growth, which is what the internal links of the one is the James Evans and against the perception caused overall U.S. election because of 1914 style economics, but it also has a spin-off effects into other sectors, which isn't means our $35 million population doesn't matter. The James Evans index of these six here makes the broader U.S. lash-out claim, which is suggested to the alternatives here. Also said that Democratic peace theory solves overall world. We will concede this argument. It's a truth claim in the debate. The results in overall spillover. That was the aspect about the centralization claim was answered by Dresser, which is the result in smarter investment. The Miller part is about trade. Obviously, doesn't assume the internal links about innovation, which is necessary. We're at the tipping point. That innovator right now. People in before went on and determined would be one that food supply. We have now more than 2 years before we see during precedent, which is not possible. You guys are going to get a picture need. The active so many made our family as well. They give you their alternative possibilities. As you know, technology, we accept the same legitimate as the animal that can choose future. We can choose make it a better world for all. After never show language where technology can only support numbers. We can do a little bit closer to everything. Has that technology to some extent. You have to do a children to turn away with technology. Chinese war in the same provision of force. The word in 17 was about holidays. The parties for technology when they have fusion party gain control technology is no longer encouraged the technology ban. A message get incorporated. We doom all of humanity. Now the war on drugs advantage. It is not based on a faulty premise. The U.S. is what produces the global war on drugs. The Marvels evidence indicates that organized crime exists and meaningfully exports global violence. They've also conceded the 1AC impact about the violence caused by the war on drugs, independent of things like organized crime, which is massive and structural in turn. Their impact is on threat, inflation, rapid online division, security references, both enemies is better. What is missing from the kind of division is why the national security was about objective to treatment of threats. Hence, so he transferring to review defense to make our frame problems on the basis of network intelligence to make it better just to know over solution to people are fired from percentage use analysis is something important is writing the decrease in rent taking would increase overall career discrimination, also organized crime is what would result in funding for a decrease in governance and corruption, etc. Is a statement on the use of force now because we underline the reason why organized crime is causing that confusion on the status, but we saw the short overall governance the only based on democracy was also based on the war on drugs, which is independent of the statement on the use of force. The PMC shift is our when they are shifting the counter narcotics business was the plan solid. They also having contested our internal link about solving the exportation of democracy. Next part by Bernstein includes the Bernstein to be our useful counter approaches the one necessary based on the consequences of the centers and our experts based on the future of the solve from this part of the focus there is making the difference for focusing on the construction is possible with the drugs centers without being something but theoretical kinds of concerns and internally consistent hypothesis one of the future matter whole from a chain of events. 1AC he says that democracy solves war. It's a DH the alternative in the framework argument. The ASA point is international civilian means a decrease in the propensity for war based on the opportunity cost is higher because of domestic audience costs as a result of the change in citizenry. Now the K of reverse co-option specific engagement key Ferguson and 11 verse not only but also the change of their focusing on David the role based on policy and commerce revolutionary deals one thing like that where we're doing each other rules and also this question also, the third process which was specific by step, because each was associated with regular enemy, put the different views in important question the assumption of the automatic everything ahead of credits to certainty the realism is more polymorphous and assume the answer is governor funds requires approximately institutional innovation and can go beyond saying needle little with the needle lessons and it's similar to build that specific governmental things to maybe find source that we can be repurposed. They don't solve any of the case. A is the one you see gathering evidence and it could be a failure of legal solutions means it doesn't solve. B is they don't convince Russia or China to change the war on drugs. C it doesn't result in a sustainable industry because of the lack of industry certainty, institutional focus, C matters. self-harm space, and the condition of the change macro levels of saving macro prejudice, ethical self-intervention, artists, such intervention, producing effects of the macro global, when you get out of the current side of fluid, you need the whole time to record attention, just as a farm to find a change, one within it, will check out, work on desert, punish a sheet, already change, one plans to try to get to response to macro level to reflect security, assessing the mentioned acts of political mobilization, and embrace the self-realization to find ceremony together, that's just not realize everyone's a duty caring for oneself, and working to also celebrate the former primary and full center, and the self-engagement with itself is not a fit for democracy. The affect link doesn't deny the truth of whether or not the U.S. does actually export those particular ideas. The causality of how they understand the U.S. is wrong. Harrison 11A, where there has been American voting difference are these elites from the same countries that are rich, such as not our common both marketing peace might be present, but the capitalist illusion of the capitalism not right. So others capitalist peace, no lash out of intervention, brand 70 market system side, but the person who stands exactly the number of wars of some of the public actually which is what they're so we're not convincing that you guys know what is it being without the pragmatic effort. Affect is useless garbage, crushing in making the research what's morning developed by affect and choosing practice the question of what these instances when it says the majority of these work points success companies that even though they miss it seem Christianity phenomenon the importance of the work is where one should emphasize the importance of factors of today give around seeing the bench return that such as they multiply we have to find a way to move from distracting affect we're just distracting from a blood how much we don't have to politics the levers affect for political purposes transition wars Anderson 84 the Western country family there's nothing but it's a challenge and of your intervention well I think it's a city and more concept I will transition social myself also apart from the world of possibility altogether the world getting better now it's not perfect but action key deep that 10 testing in the world getting general that right now you're trying to get out of the truth result any metric you look at or response to any other point in the right much of the bulk poverty numbers and money that's our only memory of every developing country promises is sustainable income there's finding about the part of their partners being able to see countries to see mission and find over the past some years ago there's become recently decoupled from carbon recently coming to grow without needing more ships to be also press on the sun or getting into future when arising revolution for energy landscape and probably get competition to send a good chance to get without something to start holding our time with these other what is those apart from before we get into their own actions we live the world up with better conditions things will probably get worse in the sector change it for the better the alt is just worse Neil lives over 14 running in the cutting influence of the different with the all that we got is less cutting and help down moderate public goods and innovation and then quite it will overcome more most and give us a chance to depending on alternative on all those from the fighting the process to not never the chance to change all positive be pretty people the time the system means more well than more freedom involved than any other government starting the ability to self-perform itself the law solves extinction of 2014 when the climate change war or actually be knowledge we can compare law and make things that are working and this has to be delivery to the pass evidence or cultivate negotiations more price of begin and should be deliveries for seeing decisions when this is going to work and price which the well-being of the fact we need to go lawyers or professional process lawyers have so from this one we do not say within our 40 days we have no effect on a very cool solution to go around there's one model that is working maxi the rule of law the third three lawyers to laws too much litigation does understand the law content legalism is much better than the alternative only are actually I want to see decisions the benign dictator laws useful superstructure whatever is a legal medicine legal medicine and live significantly better or will without unified norms will turn to water self-pressure return to guns instead that's not good deputy laws the safer we are lawyers of a change you need done to the learning outside critically creative legal structure about the ability of strategically one practice school brings the copper border sector to figure out the cures with the system will for lawyers some never can it's although even more than us using lawyers skills that to do but a word of mind we face are unprecedented we need the problem solvers of the highest order no catch-all solution to structural violence more for the meeting and the fact is that more dangerous is like distance that trying to grow the certain sets from decisions that's taken from more something right press on poverty race and unless we want to be government for many countries will produce a better world balance measures of human power given the difficulties and overcoming any of these social problems that are put towards the war for generations, permutations to the plan and non-mutually exclusive parts of the alternative if it can overwhelm the status quo and overwhelm the link to the plan. Neo lives sustainable, the alt is useful, suburban, and entertaining acts of the realist scholars running blue, okay, molested into those real remains on nothing that's people in the name of it, or the emergency to something like that, not to make it also the subjects of more knowledge is more of a time. I'm critical very much engaged with as a real psychology. Neo lived in almost already is unproductive at the end of the useless midpoints. I think last first time to vision comparison and watch to the we're almost working in the Neo level project is one of the most successful parts of the announcement wishing away from individuals or our features of likely need to engage with the reality of neoliberal capitalism. The alternative fails and locks in the status quo approach to drug policy that views addiction as a matter of individual responsibility. Their embrace of letting be discounts the role of political institutions in modern life and reduces politics to an individualistic project of ethical self-improvement and becoming this is going to take the rest of it to easy, but it's awesome. Lemon. I started watching the problem of I think it's not the most that's going to be on our premise on radical government so we're not begging head here and the plan that is social movement and mass by which twisting of medical policies, which are recognized as a global, these following the acts are moved terrible crime, and they were drug use, exhorting the, and it's just responsibility for themselves and, kind of within to what for drug use, shifted away from the foot of apparatus, which inculcate these habits of neurology, which many more mechanisms, ethics, and strictly thought, speak more about with friends and some, and reading more democracy, less about the institutional doctrine of subject to, treatment democracy, presents a postmodern sensibility as far as treatment anxiety without considering the over this means something producing those anxieties and the existence of those most in the red of democracy from fostering other this is not very solid. However, it does not consider true difficulty adapting a position for way does not speak a society where the most disadvantaged having their minds that come out of beliefs, foundational thought, and democratic the current execution of the articulation mechanism of muscle error is expressing the prescribed micropolitics of desire, something where what message of reason reduce fundamental to a problem offered at individual ethical affairs rather than a medical condition requiring a public health issue. Mark that public health issue. I'm going to mark that before the process of that school. Okay, good to go.
Okay, so your argument is that monopoly, you solve the monopoly on the use of force because PMCs are used for counternarcotics now.
I mean, that's like one of 3 internal links to broader democracy and use of force stuff, but yeah, that's one of them.
What piece of evidence do you say that you have that says it's a monopoly on the use of force now?
I think the Hodson card speaks to that, and it says how PMCs are dramatically changing the game.
Okay, we can talk about PMCs, I guess. So how does the plan solve PMCs outside the United States?
Because RF says that the things PMCs are being used for outside the U.S. is fighting the global war on drugs, and that is the frontier war.
Like multiple pieces of evidence talking about UAE as sort of kind of democratic approach.
Yeah, those are used in limited context. RF says the counter-narcotics missions are the ones that are the greatest, especially since they implicate broader state.
Where's the sort of magnitude comparison in this piece of evidence?
I don't have the one you see up, but I could pull it up right now.
Cool. Yeah. No, that's fine. Whatever.
You sure you don't want the line?
What? Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Actually, no. Well, that's fine. Why does economic decline cause war? Is it just a sort of an argument that the United States will lash out?
So there's the lash out claim, but there's also the broader we need to innovate our way.
No, I got you. I'm not sure the lash out claim. Why would we lash out?
I mean, our James evidence indicates we perceive broader insecurity. We want access to resources.
I don't think your James evidence says either of those things. It does say that the main story today, as then, is the precariousness of financial globalization. This seems to be a structural argument about why globalization contributes to the fragility of the world system. How do you solve that?
By making that system sustainable.
Why? Why? If financial globalization, as this piece of evidence says, is intrinsically unstable because of the ways
I disagree with your characterization that it says it's intrinsically unstable. Also, the app makes it
the great illusion, the interdependency of an increasingly complex global economy, quite an opposite conclusion was possible and plausible and proved to be the case.
Yeah, because of
what we have
changed power. He continues to say dynamics of 1914 are re-emerging because an economically declined power wants to use finance as a weapon.
Right, finance is a weapon, and now finance is more viable than a weapon because of financialization of the globalized economy. How do you change the structure of the economy to make it more sustainable?
Via new innovations, which is what
the innovations. Okay, now let's talk about the innovations. So you said spin-offs are like how you get to innovations.
Well, there's also the prisons argument and the creation of a new.
What is the prisons argument?
Just like the fact that people are locked up in prison.
How does that change the financialized state of the global economy?
Because it means that RF says the U.S. economy is stagnating now, and that it needs a new industry and a new.
New industry does not change financialization. If anything, it increases. How do you change the structure?
So how do we change? Well, one, we've said that.
How do you make it sustainable?
How do we make it sustainable? Via sustaining the existing global order.
Via sustaining. So people get released from prison and devise a way in which to create an international set of institutions.
One, there's the decentralization argument predicated on federalism. Second, the creation of
what is the
industry.
Decentralization argument?
Sorry, the Dresner claim and the one I see about how decentralized states are important for picking the appropriate winners in terms of innovative projects like clean technology.
Sorry, just other questions. Just about things where you didn't read the royal card, and you didn't read the Chandler something. The what? The one after the Bernstein card.
I don't think so.
Okay. That was terms on the K.
Just like non-mutually exclusive part.
Theory arguments on the K?
No. No Bose's a voting issue this time.
I wish.
That was the best theory argument the whole time.
I'm just gonna stick that. Manifest
You know what I mean? Yeah, I see.
Like right before the Arvidsson card about the alt.
Oh, wow, I see. Okay, that's just. Great.
I'll be done at 8:25. That's all right.
Good. That's right. Why not just leave it? Just leave it.
I don't want
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's weird. It's something else. I forgot to like add the thing that makes it seem like it's not. So I had to keep adding all the emails. But it's funnier that I just type red one that gets all the emails. I'm just gonna have to work with the template.
He's like Matt Damon in Team America. Oh man.
Ready? Okay.
All right.
The order will be the K. There will be an overview. No.
Yeah.
Just mention.
Like it's not going to be that one, but you know it's a chunk, but not a huge chunk.
One.
Anonymous audience member.
Man, the audience cleared out so fast. They didn't like what was happening. Is everyone ready? What's up? The 2AC drove a couple people. Okay, everyone ready? 1AC is a commitment to global neoliberalization, routine and permanent rhetorical economy of less regulation, less means state should be interpreted through the cipher of a broader ontological trend towards economic deregulation. Individuals are responsible as called upon as rational individuals to regulate their behaviors in relation to a dominant global market. They evidence indicates that weed is the easy liberal solution because it's instant commodity status needs the radicality of structural change to be permanently delayed. We are a removal of police on weed is code for weird intensification of policing in other arenas, which means there is simply a shift in the optics of criminality. To be made clear that the negative is a refusal of growth and capitalism of every sort, but a particularly violent kind of neoliberals, which means we don't look to a lot of their bigger offense impacts extinction with Robinson Evans' political will to regularly decrease return towards their sustainability and their systematic stability increased by financialization, massive warfare, systemic violence, massive side environmental destruction causes feedback effects to trigger multiform destruction of violence. We're not a single war to reason that 2EC why they might resolve those things through tech innovation, which means you should not defer to certain generic promise happens this layer. Only defense was unforming they conceded independent offense or destruction, centralized agriculture, no carbon spread on that one there. They were screwed there. They conceded independent uniqueness, now destroying fascism right now, it's destroying democratic institutions. Bottom up, the Robinson Evans now destroys valuable life by sacrificing ethics and protecting instrumental value, vigilant by security bars, recognize one's own overreaching recognize being threats to security, never achieve security there. They seek they will contact security business security measures to direct themselves being observed. The anti-political was the error process of the annihilation possible
for both terror experience by it is include this being everything spread the large only increase with the crime being circulation statements or what's been what is this sort of spread politician here to call by the standing certain evil worse than death slower taking place on the framework based role of the balance of analysis the ontological commitment to neoliberalization you want to see in framing first means we have to analyze the taken for granted ideological grids through which we analyze the world separately from our decisions about action the presuppositions about how objects and individuals are in the world are debaters put forth grandiose political schemes as if most of us would make a big political decision which is nothing but a rationalization for our inability to grasp the hopelessness we find ourselves in which causes a result from this impact term and which then impacts above start with the presupposition of non-agency in this big framework and frames debate through such that its values provided by technology produces more unpredictability when we're confronted with inherent ontological finitude to run intense future consequences will change both future starting with the more or less distance such multi destroys years of things when all things position castable framework replaced by the representation of ground versus precise gathering loss such constitutes almost as capable of conceiving of being the abyssal realms conceive the very rational thinking in several like continuing black possession technological being still limits their function define its function of quote like specific engagement in institutional policy like the question of whether they even have access to those institutions or those policies if they don't we are also a kind of institutional focus which we place those institutions in the question we don't write on sort of abdication of legal responsibility or legal warning which means they have to win and the indication that they create a good form of agency that's unique sort of benefit of Belgian Fidelity 7 undocumented experience among with good but happens to philosophical reading to empirical policy from the freedom of the two underpin different policy responsibility judgment for policy concerning taxes strategic construction being common is there no such thing can be realized wider adoption requires a fundamental reevaluation of what it means to be now weak confidence or macro political decisions are not the results of rational policy but a final point in your trajectory of small moments like this may run no instantaneous exercise to go to war but having the world revealed to them in such a way that battle war is necessary is more real and what the affirmative is doing is we try our dialogue fully confirms the same which used to debate do that challenge ourselves and not be so certain this is our opportunity to dwell and be clear that the alternative has to open up we win the links and the impacts the alternative is only a question of situating ourselves otherwise inside of this space now they make a few arguments about affect the affirmative narrative versus the narcissism or narcissism response. The affirmative narrative is constructed to be a narcissistic view of global politics. The global innovation needs to be like the United States global government, more of our than global economy markets like us. Organized crime is the perfect obscene underside of the world of fully globalized American narcissism because any kind of economic behavior not defined by our laws puts the system denying criminality that these hobbs for the one sees an ideological threat to maintain unchecked accumulation of PMCs expanded far beyond American usage the notion that American norms of force to determine how every country will utilize PMCs, every country will restructure their legal system is the worst mode of seeing the world through the mirror paradigm of American action. The one is the evidence indicates that causes war, but it independently causes extinction of Meister 96. 14,000 wars in 36 SBC, selling everything hard wreck, so the visa list, all those subsidy proposition, the war killed Chad, Germany, for States, Rex, and 50 SBC, favor visa, self-produced dreams, boys, soldiers, from present were sustained by the pride national, so much population, pro-war, pro-nuclear, possibly forward, the individual arrest, tendency, like the spirit, linked to the experience for personal cops, nuclear war, the converts, the across the distance, helps rule out the danger, that disciplinary biases to shape the conclusion that includes 66 with general kind of team, other species, you can't read the PMC here outside the question of global neoliberalization, it's drop in the bucket, is economics, what's driving the PMC, change ads, take the actual military powers, municipal, given the right, successful corporation, building influence, but economies, major powers, the return power, power military system, being professional forces, brought to control only PMCs based on mistakenly they're an aberration, should be put price, but making part much larger trend PMCs are only big players and trends towards privatization of social and economic activity, consequence of neoliberal restructuring state activity. Now they be reading some grave evidence that says about paranoia, we are not even paranoia, arguments between system response to the piece of affect evidence that says we're useless garbage, we're not an advocate of the trick is garbage, useless garbage, now the transition more starving, transitions are already happening, that's a thesis claim of our argument, yes, transitions, well, the transition board might happen if during an absolute collapse of capitalism, the impact of Robinson Evans, but if there's a movement to break down the stranglehold of neoliberals and that destroys the reason why there would be a dangerous overreaction or so could warrant for why this happens also proves the paranoia argument, proves the narcissism argument, but if anything changes, and we want the world, we will lash out against it, they say it's getting better, and empirical evidence denies that, and John Moore, we love that kind of growth and caps, we can see wars, and he claimed over conflict, wrote Paris was taken from 1945, and he to wars, was in the top of the college, last American wars, hard to take more freedom, military intervention, military budget, scat, people, the cost of like political science, folks, to crack down up and keep military economic growth, as we expect power to be wars, disrupt trade, constant scheme, maintain trade links, wage war more effectively, and reliance on positivism, unique and dangerous story out of 10. Positive emergence makes historical lines between state military, positive philosopher, domination, social science, and the same link, but particular James organization, science, second world war, scientists, co-option for the generation, rational tries playing after months, physical agglomeration, war machines, free-floating active community, positive emergence, the time war, taking a free organization, war machine, with up, dispatch investigation, classes, breaks, and masculine, physics, the guys valuing neutrality modes, to mind and small, nothing that are treated as a whole positive story is going to be governed, persuasion, public childless, no exclusive sites of genre, taking instruction, circulation, also the deep period meeting by full grade, low class localities, and the same positive achievement, reversing active naval domination. Now, they say that they're only arguing we tax innovation solves 2015, 14, 1, you query the economic terms of graduating employees, wealth, and income, production, employees, place most focused in 1910, and exhibits consequences more than 12 integration, reveal power, medical, principal, turn to convert, state, diverse, made forces, for inverse diffusion, knowledge, invested, influences, economic laws, less powerful diffusion, knowledge, and freely ambiguous, tech, multiple convergence, process may be embedded by the works we trade as fundamentally process diffusion, sharing of knowledge out of the market, back to the brand, progress, technical rationality, supposed to lead automatic traffic, human capital, organization, how these two optimistic beliefs are mostly illusory transformation, sort of logically possible, some extent, relative influence, is not far less consequential one way, maximum little evidence, literature, national influence, increase significantly, very long time, for a long period of time, reforms of greater equities than distribution, knowledge, skills, no matter how political
force decision also like it is more than overwhelmed by powerful forces to push towards greater inequality growth and some groups of principal forces very only partly national spontaneous also spends large part on education policies, access to training, to acquisition of appropriate skills and associated institutions. They say the China model is bad and move away from neoliberalism is dangerous first, so it doesn't have to be China. We keep going out, we can produce counter institutions that allow us to organize our economic differently. Second, it's another with the market, either us or China ignores both possibly state innovation and market. The fact that the redeploys frequently used Trump is sort of menacing Asian otherwise the destruction destroying force of the entire economy demonstrates the sort of racist and nationalist linkages and they're not just with the world. They say legal learning is good, sure, we're also trying to learn about the law, and we're not saying we should abolish the state. This is all going to be affirmative because your kind of knowledge is knowledge trained towards the dissolution of the state law. When our neoliberal Marxist turns, you're attacking innovation armies because will destroy the possibilities for efficient management of technology. Like read the Rosa card PS time. No, there's no catch-all solutions better. They say no catch-all solutions and no structural claims. Federalism is the dream of an absolutely deregulated state powered with global federalism tries to use the powerful ideological tool through which the future of all industries, economies, and innovation depend on a continued deregulation of market system which will spur individual actors to do research without the nasty state bossing the rest. This is an ideological trope in the dream of the disappearance of government whatsoever. It's very good. Of canvas and evidence of the one and see forces destruction of the institutions of social welfare which cause rapid increases in poverty, which is the reason why the system won't respond in the way that your dramatically idealized evidence that says capitalism is good. Claims it will have a reduction of prohibition on a global scale is not for a retreat of the bad state with the absolute void of international law, seducedness, and nine. The particular claim to state universal law is always uncertainty, just by not fakers and it takes time to fill out, so we're getting depth critique with characters that are childless, the interest of power courts judge. To take trends and deals creation law of communities always returns where child creates quotation the words of very sovereignty. So the sovereignty of absolute the sovereignty of absolute police and that will someone sort of like sovereignty like civil justice comes nihilistic with for all time type of reason worth war indicates sovereignty is not retreating with one. But it makes sense the enemies both fatalists and mere criminal absolutized radical evil that are taking form. If these actions terrorists attended by test by the common level community organized around effective share technology for capital legal system given circulation cost effective and war is called competition police action. But once it's taken a lawful form everywhere and nowhere market and nowhere this permutations to both acceptance and transfer links or to global liberalization and the liberalization and your theory of international political economy destroys only stable expected impossible impact turning the world fully legalized weed, which means that's a unique reason for negative second communicative neoliberals with the idea they can sever themselves from the absolute commitments of the YC mirrors and neoliberal assumptions of rational atomic individual convey their implication of broader machines and social dynamics that link arguments above are also all reasons why the permutation is a bad idea. They say neoliberalism is sustainable and that the term has been overused, it has become today. Neoliberalism is theories of like a practice both human being the well-being especially advanced by liberation and freedom more recently emerged concern of neoliberalism becomes overgeneralized concept of change influential power that support politically. Neoliberalization has been periodized refers to for my collection of the government's free subject played by rationalist day-to-day paper of our next issue as tends to treat government on these two top-down staff and minor concerns central organization team. See, to be strict executing government responsibility, social protection, enhanced personal responsibility, should carry responsibility on public welfare. Do that still comes responsible station, the powerful people that struggle with resource allocation and regard to environmental evils, neoliberalization, central organization, things that subjecting nature
directly to market mechanisms or directly whatever market there.
Well, the top of the tendency.
Hold on 1 second. So I need you to 11 here. 11 page. Okay. 10 seconds.
Top of the 20, you said you don't reject all neolib, just
no, we don't reject all growth and capitalism.
And my question is, you said you just reject, the bad parts. Would you mind elucidating what those bad parts are for all of us?
We would reject the movement towards a global and increasingly deregulated and decentralized form of governments and political economy, which we think
so you
plan both supports.
What other forms of neolib exist in the world of your middle ground? If we include some, but not all.
I don't know what you mean. Sorry, can you rephrase?
You said you only get rid of the bad parts. You've identified one of the bad parts.
When I say we don't get rid of everything, I mean that the idea that markets might continue to exist is possible. Our neoliberalism arguments don't mean that we have to abolish growth or abolish markets.
Markets or growth, or what are
the point is that we need increased regulations of people like financial institutions, large-scale tech firms, et cetera, that are important for maintaining sort of continued stable and not sort of out of control growth.
About this Baumeister card, it says that because of low self-esteem, Nazi Germany.
No, it's the opposite. It says low self-esteem isn't a good predictor. Narcissism is a good one.
What's the warrant for why this causes extinction? It says ranging from personal conflicts to nuclear war. How does that ever escalate beyond?
It says that based on reading work by historians, sociologists, and political scientists, there's a convergence of evidence that indicates that everything from small personal conflicts to nuclear wars can be explained by this idea of narcissism as a dominant mode of state behavior.
So what does the alt do to eliminate narcissism?
The alt is a refusal of the way that you have narcissistically pictured the world.
The Trinity made a claim about movements. Have you heard that movements are successful at changing the CSA or changing law?
I don't think we have to win that they're successful and that we spill over necessarily to those movements. movements, but that if we create the sort of the intellectual or ontological space for such a thing to succeed, that would be
framework argues and all, as opposed to like we actually do material shit themselves.
Well, the alt in the 1 and C was we should analyze the plan and critique it. So yes, we'll be continuing going for that.
Any of your cards actually support this movement's arm?
What do you mean?
Like that movements are happening or that they'll be successful? Are you willing to take like a control F test on the word movements being highlighted?
I'm not even at this point really sure what argument you're talking about. If you're talking about our response to transition wars, there are movements that exist right now. Obviously, Occupy, things like that. Movements in the global South all exist with
What is
capitalism.
the alt's approach to the strategy of legalization? So is the CSA still on the books? Do you say that as a result of the alt is no longer?
I don't think that the alt has to take a stance on what should happen. Our argument is that we are critics of the way that you have intellectually constructed policy.
Best creates political agency. What does the alt do?
Well, our Bay evidence does indicate that it's useful on both an intellectual and activist perspective to consider weed still illegal, because that allows us to maintain a certain level of radicality towards the system.
Okay, I'm gonna start with the bottom of the 2NC, a really long card. He said it was really good, and then go to the first advantage in the second one. So I'm gonna figure out what they're calling. Yes.
What was the case study again?
One direct innovation. Everyone ready? Y'all got the speech time? Yep.
There was a limit that this card is not about the war on drugs to use a drug metaphor to discuss the failures of radical democracy. I like commonly what this evidence does say is that radical democracy is mean because it doesn't help people how to fix their lives. They live in fear. The app is a worse version of that. We went on responsibilization links above the fear of the unknown described by Laban. It's not really isn't the traditional state politics. We'd only pay this over makes it worse fears than without the app. So it's essentially try or die negative. Gunner and hate. We think we can live in a life of fear and anxiety, constantly and lots of trouble. Institution all the family know it. Deliver a better world. We lose the faith in the power of humans to solve problems. Laban in 2006 is an evolutionary vision an expectation of the institution to provide the continuous cycle security persistence. But despite the daily experiences of the general family institutions, to sex lives and successfully address the underlying causes and introduce responsive fear. The best the response of the traditional institution government displaces fear rather than addressing, conquering it, and resulting in a constant state of ongoing ontological anxiety. The response to this article concludes with a discussion of the alternative ontological premise for planning beyond the states, giving for those wishes and certainty of fear and what this might apply for open for those alternative processing of care in relationship to the abortion of the unknown. Go to the more addressing management. I think I'm going to go for no state law, force out fundamental 1980s to all of their evidence. I don't think they have a single piece of evidence that supports the idea that the state has a particularly good control on violence. Now, Wolf is great. He is qualified professor plus director at the Bonn International Center, whatever that is. Like he makes three primary sources of privatization of violence. They will claim to solve this. However, there are two things wrong with this claim. Our trial evidence has been on this question. Indicates that the PMC industry has become a multi-billion-dollar transnational industry in the U.S. As even the biggest demander of PMCs anymore, which means they cannot solve globally, even if they reorient PMCs away from counter-narcotics, because countries like Russia and the UAE are spending millions and hundreds of millions of dollars on PMCs right now, something they have never accounted for. I think it's particularly true. The 2AC was very brief on all the questions of the case. I think that if you cannot draw line for the 2AC, the 1 AR, you try to let the 1 AR expand on this analysis because we spend a lot of time on the case of the 1 and 2. We shouldn't be punished for that. Second is that economic power military translates to military power, not because you can buy all the sort of necessary equipment and services on the open market, which means that as long as you are rich, you can have an army, which is something they have fundamentally not grappled with. Third is that the liberals rose the logic of territoriality and writ large. There are no states no longer states are taking increasingly a backseat to things like corporations. I don't think they've answered any of these questions. It takes out the whole advantage state monopoly on bonds is key in terms of resilient democratic peace out of democracy. Evidence in their impact evidence even says in other places the retreat of the state will have less fortunate consequences and at best the re-emergence of the market at the expense of administrative controls and welfare will mean diminished security and often greater turmoil. That's their impact evidence. Now they haven't had impact in the terms of the war on drugs. I think we have done a better account of why the war on drugs is possible at all. It's fundamentally neoliberal construct in which we create a responsibilization. That's our Bay evidence, which indicates that as long as we allow neoliberalization and the sort of responsibilization of our health policy policy to continue. The war on drugs will be inevitable. The Bernstein evidence correlation is not causation. They are not Bernstein. Their evidence is about sort of scenario planning, writing narratives with plot lines. All of their arguments are about sort of structuralist claims about how the economy functions and how democracy functions. They are not the sort of point planning that their evidence is talking about. They answer the individual arguments anyway, which is that definition of things like democracy are fundamentally unstable concepts that you can't draw particularistic conclusions about. However Kantian piece of going, I don't mean Kantian like Kant. Actually, I do. It's about perpetual peace. The idea that markets plus democracy equals peace is wrong. Temporal dependence, they're not. Temporal less relative model means that peace might create democracy instead of the other way around, when you don't expect or you are more likely to take part in a risky business venture. Repercussion controls for temporal line fitting reduces significant of the results to zero. Beckcast and Tucker 98. The liberal piece is calculated out our research. Two components of this liberal piece: the political one, democracies and economic one. The argument that independence and henceforth a risk of empirical qualities resulting in there was solidified conventional wisdom regarding trade observations performed by ordinary logic and analysis on BTS-CS data without accounting for temporal dependence rate resulting in the trade lower the probability of democracy and trade lower the probability of military in a different picture emerges and whatever when we could correct for temporally dependent observation test for whether temporal dependent dummies or temporal splits are required to indicate a strong duration dependence probability of sustaining either result by chances to computer precision zero. Duration dependence has dramatic consequences results provide no evidence for the liberal economic piece. Overfitting, ignoring co-founding covariance between war and geographic proximity as well as third-party conflict initiation means that specific dynamics of the relationship between France and Germany and Belgium, etc. Swamp this sort of generalized claim that they are making more serious than it sounds. Bill prices are long to be less likely among democratic countries that have a high level trade base and unstable statistical tests as well as out-of-sample predicted cross-validation. Results frequently cited in the literature are plagued by overfitting, cannot be characterized as identifying the underlying structure which international conflict is influenced by democracy, trade, and international governmental organization. Many statistical associations have for the geographical proximity dependence with the same initiator and a higher order depends on these dyadic data despite high statistical significance and punitive substantive reports. None of the variables is associated with a substantive predicted power. War continues, increasing level of trade. None of the aspects receive strong empirical supporting the analysis data. Okay, I'm watching the data. These also are all impact defense the econ stuff as well, because obviously if we win that econ plus democracy does not equal peace, and econ alone can't equal peace, however the innovation for the impact evidence is negative evidence. It indicates that globalization, increasing flows of neoliberal financialization, whether the economy fundamentally fragile is a return to sort of 1914 style and waging of economic warfare. I think the cross-section is demonstrative on this question. They cannot offer an answer to why the stable last however that claim is backwards. No mistake, it's support likely to be replacing context economic price of lower instead of anything conflict may hammer domestic conflict could be by reducing. They also insert these may be particularly difficult to recognize in large studies when the governments face severe domestic discontent. They should become less likely to become involved in militarized interstate conflicts and market conflicts. No innovation. Come on now, they don't have an explanation for why people getting out of prison and legalized marijuana will create spin-offs that solve the international sort of pandemic problems that we have identified with neoliberalism. I think that this is the last gasp of neoliberalism doing anything productive. They read a textiles environment card, not all of the benefits get reinvested within the system, which will create a perpetual treadmill of production. Young and 3D treadmill production is driving force behind other economies and environmental impacts produces will not only internalize the economic cost of environmental cost of production, the whole solution in direct conflict between society and the environment, so limit the hegemony of produces economic production, fundamental conflict with ecological limits, the only way to prevent further deterioration of the current economic growth and traditional form technologies are just like superficially reduces the environmental effects almost good and ultimately increase because we're trying to reinvest in coordination of predominant consumers expect waiting for information at the part of distance to the impact of the dynamic fundamental solution rest on restructuring toward economic sustainability. No?
It's rare.
Last 12 seconds.
No, I get that.
Changes the context of climate makes globalization dangerous. Arguing that there's a stretch of improvement, but we are not out of the woods yet because there has to be a continued innovation through smart policy design. Our teams evidence that it is possible to stretch 1914 without organic economic policy only to maintain the right of the possibility of new sectors and decentralized governance. Our structures then concede that all of our words about spin-off industries, all the explanation from the one team about 2% of the economy did not make it into the one in our, which means we get all of this stuff about other industries, certain sector, etc. That even if we don't win that, those industries separate war based on increasing tax base by getting new products into the market and getting people out of jail, as well as our treasurer evidence about the overall effectiveness of portfolio diversification. With better to have 50 state actors investing in different technologies because it increases likelihood of finding the next breakthrough and it decreases our probability of getting locked into the wrong one, which means the socialist utopia they describe will only set them thinking wrong, which means only we solve threat production is bullshit. So CF5 countries are going to be on straight respect not don't call state class involved because we'll be against international. We have a police social future even involved. We get that over from electric market globalization, we try to the effect of culture change, and from economic freedom, capital over time, trading presently, not to market oriented prices, market enhances international, and our public price agreement, which is the seems for this part two. Those trade goals, and somebody arguing the market increase over its market, other food price increase, and success policy, the direct direction, and red taking, we can't reason now, social part that we make increase globalization, rights of human rights, and insertion that is natural cultural work, and reason that has one else states, but all the price taking statements for all folks can play. We like these funds here because building out a school president, a trade over resources, and now sustainable development of other capture such mention the question together, conditions country transform human resources, and sustainably are results from counter to the events users are arguing that events of the innovation testing damage to building this way, finds no such effect, they can see the broader primary question that we've already passed the tipping point, which means the alternative is hopeless, and making a way out is the only possible solution. Now the war on drugs advantage at the top, they can see the broader war on drugs advantage this week, and lose the entire PC's full of it, still eliminated because their CCC evidence says U.S. market structure is driving, but an organized crime argument is not that we forget resources tracked out globally, but rather than U.S. demand is creating a price premium that makes it lucrative to get into organized crime only. The market-driven structure solves that, and since they've spotted us that the alternate leads legalization of their posture does not the result is both selections being seized. They have no impact to the uses like services and cooking meals for the troops, but our government says that the military use of PMCs, i.e. the combat roles are driven by the war on drugs, which only we solve the wild evidence is the best argument to make because it says that the actual removal from the CSA is the only modern peace-scale approach that gets other countries on board. The response to the alternative from Russia and China, their drug control sites will be saying to fuck off, but if we have a proof that shows that legal regulation on marijuana can be effective, then we can transform the system through their state policy design, the state vaccine arguments are relevant if it's exercised through policy choices that we in fact we don't need the PMCs there anyway, though, because they need to do the war drugs and some classes of democracy. Their way evidence is one unqualified activist, but it doesn't answer our chronicles down the brain scene evidence. We identify causal chains. That's one bringing advantage to their evidence is a strong person characteristic, which makes it impossible for us to defend the evidence. Also true of all their claims, they consider the provisional judgments are sufficient. Their back evidence and all the other things are either really old or have selective evidence, which means you should prefer our theories. Those that GBC evidence here's more evidence of both 14 countries with liberal economics, real things for it. These could be primarily true legal economic practices for the administration of capital and statistically think associations with peaceful nations of the market are more able to present a single liberal health and the very better economic cost capital. But it says so we better anticipate costs of cost we identify your cost economic cost capital, which is the legal cost for organizations and capitalism may be crazy the rest such by crazy needs of capital. Their cards are selected highlighted using studies from the 90s, the framing issues that our studies might have overfitting tendencies, etc. But what possible study backs up their impact claims? Yeah, when a number of scholars arrive independently at a very similar conclusion about an issue of cardinal significance, their thesis deserves attention. The thesis of the foreign balance of decrease should be the most feasible American history relevant natural thesis to find that currents of war no broken value decrease and 615 the decrease war covers no marks no marks no other countries of unbelief and unable to accomplish broken solution from the serious only countries no longer overwhelming out charging instead having become economic theory the connected greater economic communities and decrease like political right just so as gaining economic access to the conference with leaders and sovereignty now PK page at the top of the top of leadership argumental crisis specific war to an argument is not free for resources that explain on the other page their extinction and back to the total assertion our one improving evidence is better and innovation is also turning back to it our baker and capable evidence says that requires explicit policy of them to it their mutual evidence is a high degree of critique of materialism and names that we never read so abstract and the focus on charitism that you should not read into it too much there's no impact to their value in the life stuff death always prioritizes the to elimination of right we should have those that even if you believe life there is not believe it I believe that they do something believe that future actually better might believe that I want that we're looking for argument is present now we're looking that we should although since it's not into what we should do we should not put suicide and kill ourselves that almost something as you some of these women instead of provide the record how much like means to me that other people follow my example group the framework to make classify all the permutation stuff legalization is bad is options for the athletes even if we don't create ideal policymakers whatever that doesn't matter because we're manufacturing to the alternative we never said the voting athletes anything is purely a competition argument they would be the burden of rejoinder they know when the legalization is bad otherwise you're recruiting a brand new role balance to a team which makes possible for us to leverage all off and stuff now our question argument to the alternative they can see that without a specific solution nothing should change the broader structural things are criticizing detriment you know more subject and lab and evidence I'm going to finish lab and hero most things that is the technology department and here we go I'll see the innovation is ultimately revolution initial personal responsibility that taking folks away from the institutions and prescribing the micropolitics of the entire kickstart the self-project democratization they locate the word of Boston yes inside of individual discount the degree which these individuals actually feel the radically democratic or being honest but in all the most customers babies with simplification and digital called war there's the realistic but special requires both discern treatment to be open up for Americans realize we are attending to people aware of the ontological treatment. Chris said that now they have to win the affect arguments when this narcissism so they can see that affect is a poor explanation for politics means you can just assert any sort of labeling of you as narcissism without any ability to falsify it. They can see this mischaracterization of our argument. Our argument is that people cite because now there's an explanation for that because we have strong institutions for it. Our very evidence answers the overall lash our claims and their movement emphasis bullshit identity control left chest doesn't appear highlighted once in true intuition and teach me skeptical of it. Our agency emphasis the transition away from the illegal media allowed the worst stuff is all on the other pages there. Dead evidence cites no specific data which means I shouldn't have to answer the beginning evidence is the example of determinants in the debate. I criticize the Chinese and I'm not sure where they're bringing in from our written percent evidence. This is a better analytical look at like a better listen because there's no alternative institutions after the social revolution that we have impacted.
You have 819.
I'm just assuming. Or did you say? I guess it doesn't matter. Meaning, like, it doesn't really change anything. Tag it. I asked nephew to tag it.
Should I just like write sorry? I checked before we
Yeah. Hang out. Alright, that's what I'm saying. Hey, y'all are loud. Thank you.
So the order is the K and then the case.
Which case page first?
Sorry, the war on drugs and then innovation.
It's nice.
Alright, that's mine's on the task. Alright, so you are. all the closes. Ready? Okay. Massive destruction of the globe is coming right now to these provinces and the only response to this piece of war we have indicates we're past the tipping point. Our and indicates multiple interlinked crises are happening now, which destroys any sort of one piece. Response to the global economic crisis happening now is terminal because there are problems with returns on capital that PDM, so it's dropped in what AR indicates. That's a terminally crisis. Problems with global inequality is actually increasing rather than decreasing. It's better I would say. So much more statistics than any of their cards go by is based on any sort of continuation of global neoliberal capital more than the case paper. Based on reasons why there was sort of global economies and terminal crisis. There's two sort of unique conceded points in this argument. First, that warming is being destroyed now. Even as true, our past points are points that it gets worse and worse because the unchecked drive towards capitalization, neoliberalization means the warming becomes worse and faster, and faster means that the innovation will be able to catch up faster. Which is not only are the idea that innovation might be in the abstract, that is not enough to indicate the piece of your evidence that we read is much better than there is in the case that innovation will never actually create the possibility for solving environmental crises because innovation will always reinvest those problems back into the industry that destroy the environment. Firstly, is much better piece of evidence than any of the arguments you should hold. The 2-year extrapolation analysis will light in a bunch of arguments makes a single bunch of sort of one-line statements. You should not have to make a bunch of extra articulations here. They see the second internal part of the Robinson which is the collapse of globalized centralized global agriculture is coming right now. It's not a single word breathed in one area which will destroy the stability of nation states. Destroys the ability for democracy and liberal economic connections to check war because hunger is the only thing that drives nations to actually go to war, which is sort of outside of any theoretical constructions. Also, these also see the unique this time is that global patches are taking over right now. The bottom of the Robinson case, racist homophobic dictators are taking over in broad scale parts. It's obviously congressional elections recently, and also in increasing strength of racist policies in Europe. Those people are taking over. They're not the market libertarians that they're described and talked about in the utopian ideologies that doesn't resolve any of the long-term policies they're going to say that they're thinking will. And this also increases the security. His only Mitchell Carter, the value doesn't matter. The Mitchell is actually very good in the case that security is a permanent condition of our relationship to the world. We orient ourselves to permanent movement away from these sort of falsified geopolitical scenarios that our relies upon the possibility for ethics inside our localized situation. But it's uniquely important here. Not to be able to determine what the permutation and the alternate role of valid is ontological analysis. Neoliberalization is a process of subject formation, which means it's always question how we relate to other questions. I think Alice included that in the one area on this question. They have not made a causal link between a valid for the affirmative and the integration of their policy inside of any institution whatsoever. That was clear and clear in the 2 months. There's no linkage between your sort of affirmation of their policy and the imagination of that policy and any sort of real world advocacy, which is a sort of fundamental severing of solving and presumption question or arguments and pieces of their policy will be ignored because it's not the type it will be ignored and not create any sort of structural change. The balance and peace is much more important in the inside of situations like this to create the system by maintaining resistance to the legalization of marijuana. It's the sort of liberal laxity because it allows us to sort of maintain a continued preoccupation with a liberal mode of capital accumulation and increase the neoliberalization that they have increased new possibilities. Browns also increases the ideas of prison. It increases the risk of things like prison and criminality. It just shifts the sort of police focus elsewhere. That's the police argument I made above. The neoliberalism would just shift towards things like criminal organizations. The organizations themselves are the underside of capitalism, which means that they sort of maintain a fear of those situations. Now that is sort of ontological questions uniquely key to working with inside institutions. They can see that a piece of Welch in 2007 indicates that ontological questions predetermine how we engage in policies that we win the seat of ontological significance. Our analysis is uniquely important. Our point is that you should not take an action inside of this space. That you should orient yourself away from the sort of indications that their politics is. We didn't see a series of arguments about how it's a question of how individual actions build up a sort of larger social formation, which means that we let a single link to the affirmative is a reason to vote. It's a reason to reject and that's the framework of the response to the one area I would say the views that started in case the integrating into international institutions uniquely by increase possibility for more of the balance. They don't actually increase in any normative legitimacy law that absolute corporate takeover destroys the possibility that anything like technological innovation or things like that, or any of those possibilities put on a scale that agrees with the possibilities for equality, which is key to all of their advantages, things like innovation of institutions, their institutions bad and movements are not relevant. Our point is not that we join some sort of broad movements that we agree the possibility for an absolute resistance for the ontological monopolization of capitalism, which determines material success. I agree this lab and keep wasting their time here, but this lab and is just a bunch of random metaphors and miles cut. This is the Rorschach test that says the war on drugs because it's talking about ontological insecurity in relation to radical democracy. Has literally nothing to do with the one he sees, nothing to do with the affirmative, nothing to do with our argument either. The gun argument they conceded, the one here said that Lavin's analysis means we should shift away from policy analysis because we will always be stuck inside of an institutional fear that creates a sort of continued fear of politics and the level of the individual. Now that sort of paranoia argument they conceded the narcissism link, which is the reason why the permutation doesn't make any sense. Also an impact turn to the affirmative that they have no defense to. The narcissism argument because the affirmative always rereads the entirety of the globe through the American narrative. What's good for Americans and the rest of what American does is automatically interlinked to mirror by the rest of what we should. Any sort of salty take us love the arguments a pretty good piece of one it seems like comes the bottom line for impact habits in cases leads to extinction. It's not just an affect argument because their affect arguments are irresponsible in piece that broad sort of sociological, historical, and etc. Now some piece
to narcissistic state policies, state formations, create the possibility for realms also subject to the question of narcissistic sort of advocacy policies, the idea that they can create possibility for change leads to more from the balance of transition towards service, while the other flows go on the institutions those and sort of more drugs. They can't see the piece of story out of evidence in case of hospice and the tool of the military machine crossplay here in case of you have to be skeptical of all of their scholarships dropped evidence at the bottom of the whatever survive and sustain sort of process the military even if positive student content piece theory is wrong basically the entire course were highlighted very good evidence to specific statistical reasons that were dropped so we did very good analysis in the 1 hour which means I should have to read the wheel here versus time credits. Rules are claiming credit for peace that parts produced which is sort of reverse culture. I mean second is dyadic dependence they're claiming flat and singularity of different nations on a liberal map sort of economic interconnection the dumb work from the two ends indicate the capital. I mean more capital means more wars, we say a series of sites much better than most there. Of course, no state monopoly, no trade out privatization of balance. The sort of neoliberalism key to PMC's argument that they can see that people with lots of money are paying people like Blackwater. Of course, there are people like Russia and the UAE mirroring America doing this. They have a sort of drive towards security, which is something in front of cameras, all the innovation, every econ, impacts the negative parts of the financialist neoliberals makes things fundamentally fragile. To read their part after the reason why we solve these questions better. The economy innovation internally is so stupid that neoliberals is lying to by promising something like weed innovation will cause like bioterror and services. Absurd.
We had 5 something. If you want to write that down, but yeah. So it was over 5, it was under 530. I don't know, 526? 526.
Five something?
Yeah.
Hi, James.
It was like this weird circular. Very deep.
See if I can make this stand work.
You've been sitting down, man. Can't believe you're like nobody else. Because this isn't the first time.
Sit point of this knowledge.
Sick point of his. We were reading some fat studies stuff. And sick point of his knowledge.
It's disability studies.
Oh, this okay, yeah, I'm just sitting down.
Yeah, nobody's taking stuff.
It doesn't work.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying something.
Okay, innovation. The war on drugs page. The K page.
Really?
Okay. Innovation, war on drugs, the K.
Sorry.
Innovation, war on drugs, the K.
Yeah.
The 2-hour drug transition wars needs to be alternative with the one of the AC Anderson evidence says that explicit cause lash out insurance alternative solids either broad shift towards personalization of products insurance corporate backlash and overall lash out with the James Evans is fantastic on this question. It says that globalization is increasingly dangerous, but it's dangerous and overall the broader economic how much we eliminate a risk of our insurance simplified turns alternative solid can improve this and impacts that a case that they are capable of solving and cause broader global escalation or nuclear war which they have conceived as a scenario for extinction that turns and implicates their ability to solve anything. Their first argument is about the fragility of the system. Our evidence is the system is fragile, but that the only scenario that is bad is a scenario of declining economic power, which is something the affirmative necessarily solves an internal link to. Now, the 2 hours exceedingly low play on the question of the internal link. Let me shouldn't too much word for them and cross-apply stuff they have done previously in the debate. They have dropped the present evidence about broader federalism and how that results in 50 states picking different forms of technology, which is a better form of institutionalism than the alternative can do. The result of the technology is going to things like clean technology, etc. Second, they've conceded a broader claim about how we solve the economy based on creating a new industry. The economy is flatlining now, as is broader innovation, but the creation of a new industry, irrespective of what that is, reinvigorate the economy and send a signal that it can do something. Even if you think some of the risk of us solving this stuff is a little bit small, what the hell does the alternative do relative to this? The reason you can see that the treadmill of production is wrong card, which Chuck Ellis a minute. The 1 hour to read, it says it explicitly indicts their study and says that we need to make sure we need to stay on the treadmill. The terminal impact of them winning all of these case arguments that we are more of the same neoliberal development paradigm, but that assumes they have a coherent alternative and that the world isn't getting worse now. If we falsify either of those, then we have impact on the alternative and justified voting in. If their arguments are played too, we stick us on the treadmill of production, but we have said that it's unbalanced better when their nebulous affective turn. If their framework argument is true, it's just a question of which method is better. The ballot is a referendum. Do we make the world a little bit better? Finally, as you have conceded, we are past the tipping point in the status quo, which means this trier die for technological mobilization. They don't have a claim for how things like social movements are changing the way technology goes in a more equal fashion at all. Does jack shit about how we solve the broader environmental claim. Now the war on drugs advantage. You shouldn't be skeptical of our positive predictions. They conceded the 1 year argument about the burden of rejoinder is zero. You have to refute our particular predictions. We've impacted on the notion of that broader military industrial competition. We see rapid all evidence indicate that our authors aren't based on threat inflation, but they would have forced our authors to get fired down the time dependence argument. This is ironic given you're reading a card from 1998 about time dependence. We read a card from 2014 that says the consensus of all studies such as democratic peace theory and broader innovation and sustainability solves every scenario for war. The Hebrew evidence assumes different dyads in the GAD evidence. It's a broader consensus which should be preferred over one particular study. Our evidence says this is the closest thing there is to an empirical law and international relations, which proves you share heavily especially given the lack of falsification for how they solve anything. They've said more capitalism leads to war, with the Hebrew and Donahue evidence says that we solve that particular scenario for war because of a capital openness. The signaling argument means that they signal overall intentions, which means it fosters overall cooperation on environmental challenges, but also on more broadly, it also increases domestic audience costs, which are important, and decreases the likelihood of overall lash out. It solves the great power wars, wars propounders. The economy stuff is all independent of this because it's a dissent to the alternative. So the X also independently, the use of force of it is less relevant to this particular claim. This argument is about democratic interdependence and how the war on drugs undermines that. Russia and China, where the alternative doesn't solve Russia and China because it doesn't involve the state, which the one see wild evidence says is necessary to challenge the way the war on drugs functions of a status quo. Now the K page, things are getting better, and the alternative is no explanatory power for why that is the case. Only a risk that capriciously tossing out abstract notions of global order leads to deferral of political responsibility and vagueness about how to achieve improvements in living standards. It's ironic that I am foregrounding impactee in the 2 hour, but it's impactee that supports how our overall worldview is an impact turn to the maybe the app is more of the same, but we have strong evidence for structural improvements, and you have to be comfortable going back to the 1820s or taking an ill-defined leap of faith for some affective politics. The Dean evidence is fantastic, says the world is becoming more peaceful. It's most recent as a German overall battle deaths and overall war. It also says that growth has become decoupled from carbon emissions, and that economic growth no longer needs more steel. That we are off the treadmill of production, and that is tried for energy technology like fusion, which we result in the cells. Evidence says that inequality is that they result in a worse from neoliberalism that is perpetuated by China. The rest of the Robinson evidence is also answered by the rest of our cells. Evidence that says the world is getting better for a host of ancillary reasons. The ag argument is answered by Heberland, which says that only continued technological innovation can solve, especially given that we are past this big win. The next argument is about movements. That is wrong. Our evidence says that neoliberalism is sustainable and the status quo, that their vague abstraction of political framework fails to do anything. It doesn't spill up to materially impact anything, which means that there's only a risk that our cells better. The Mitchell argument is horribly dumb and a terrible way to decide the sentence of a tournament. There's a shitty Heidegger K of terrorism, which doesn't apply to our particular scenario about the war on drugs. The alternative has no means of actually resolving this claim, and the efficacy of politics is determined based on its material impact. This debate does not shape political subjectivity. This is just a glorified value. The life, planet of death occurs. That means we have no value. We also make the world better for the people who are currently living because of the violence occurring because of the war on drugs. People are getting locked up in the status quo, but people are getting beheaded in Mexico, which the alternative has no tangible mechanism for solving, which proves a trier die for a political strategy. The framework argument will explicitly concede that nothing spills off, which means that it's exclusively a question of the broader framework. They can't have their cake and eat it too if they are going for materialist impacts. It proves that we have impact on the way they access that. We have impact on alternative solvency. We have impact on the impact of their framework argument and the way it spills off. But if nothing does spill off, it proves debate does not shape our political subjectivity. They have dropped the money argument about the burden of rejoinder, which means that they can't win legalization ban. It results in something that is horribly vague and obviates any form of fairness for the affirmative. But again, we have impact on the alternative and defends our strategy within their particular framework, which proves this isn't a presumption argument. Nothing they do spills up to solve global warming anything better than we do. The rest of the ontology arguments are all answered by the preponderance of our argument. The narcissism argument all begs the question of which is on better, a balance for global violence. We don't result in more international violence or policing because the existence of a system is getting so much better in the status quo. The question of this debate is, does the alternative have any more explanatory power than the status quo of technology and innovation, which is so much better based on the preponderance of all of our data?
Always goes up. Always happens. Okay, judges, setting a timer for everybody in case you need 1:47 minutes. Use the flip for the. Once again, the evens will be back. All right. Yeah. For the 5th time. So much for excited. Yeah, I know.
He probably won't need as much food, but maybe.
We also have
You're full of them all.
Wait 30 seconds.
Hey, hey. Great, thank you.
Don't go away. Okay, now I'll see you, and you do.
I know.
I just send out a card document in case anyone wants a consolidated version.
Nope, I know. There's something worse than that.
Just your being. It's fine.
That'd be amazing too.
That would be, that's. At least two. We're gonna be like, so,
Oh, no. Yeah. No, he's So one is the arguments that I was saying are like arguments of other parties also. So this is the way you should
You're right. I would not be up here recruiting you because I would.
Alex, we don't see the uses of James evidence in the doc that
I'm sorry, which card?
the James evidence, the transfer.
Okay, I'll just send it out to you.
There's an Anderson card, but not whatever's being flagged as James or something like that.
Okay. You trying to track down Alex? So I'm not sure. I will do that. Pretty sure you will.
You should like.
What's up, Alex?
So they had a question about James and Alexander.
You all had questions about that stuff.
Yeah, just that you flagged some James evidence. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the part in here, but just because there was discrepancy going on. Wait, there is a James.
It's the one seat, so whichever that is.
Gotcha. Huh?
Yeah, it's whatever. The one about
Travis.
Yeah, I got you.
Oh, if they got it.
Okay.
That's it.
You answered what like 5,000.
I'm trying to think of it. I'm not going to claim that because but at least maybe
I think like GSU will do like dabble in that.
yeah, right. Because we definitely had like some similar cards, maybe even some of but as far as I know, we did. Yeah. could do research on that, but just don't care.
Yeah.
Like 20 minutes.
Yeah, well, it was commissioned by our social media. It's just it's
This is a touch screen too, so be careful.
scrap the one in our, only the first shortcut got read?
And the one in our.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to check with Sarah. So you're talking about like the
Like AT textiles. Contention is only the first shortcut got read?
Yes.
Yes.
That was awesome.
Yeah, we should.
Well, we got 2 of them. Well, yeah. This is kind of interesting. But it's like, well, it's kind of in their favor, and if the Titans just line it up, then it's not impossible. I just need it to like put the Steelers together. It's unlikely, but it's like I don't really understand how score works for the game. So at this point, given that 6 is impossible for the Steelers to get That was just crazy. We started Rogers over instead of Rogers. It's so stupid. It was it's not like we weren't like I'm pretty sure this might be the stupidest idea ever. Let's go to the 2 weeks. It wasn't just like this is why it wasn't just that it's just how that's what makes me more addiction from the it's like this is for the perverts. Are you having Cover.
I remember something about
all the biggest thing is they like have like these details
Very interesting. Actually,
I'm pretty pessimistic on our this one because, like, honestly, the whole revolution's like 2 or 3 years. So it's like, I still want to. It's literally just the internet. It's just so much. We need like a marquee. We were hoping that we could like trade on the
lose all.
I'm hearing over there.
Man.
No, I was trying to debate on.
I think with 1 minute to go, there are 0 ballots.
As soon as they all hear clapping in here,
All right, we all know what the music means. Our time here is through. Here it is.
we have all of them.
Mr. Lincoln Garrett.
Oh, yeah. We just look over my shoulder and make sure I get this right. Oh,
What's up?
you
Yeah.
checking out.
Over there.
Yep. All right. The decision is a 3-2 for the affirmative. Who else voted? No, I did. Do you mind? May I go? I'm like, my brain has like not much left. I could not understand why the 2AR made this framework concession. I thought it just radically changed the way I'd thought about all of the arguments in the debate up until that point. And the conclusion that you drew from that concession, I thought, was insufficiently supported to really do the work that you wanted to. Okay, so we all agree nothing spills up, nothing in terms of concrete institutional, social, collective outside of here stuff happens. And the conclusion you drew is that if there is no spill up, then debate is not a site for the articulation of the subject, something along those lines. I don't understand how that follows at all, given that the alternative from, the get-go to me was so clearly a sort of one of these problematization, intellectual criticism with the goal of trying to understand the way we are variously positioned by all of the isms. So then I'm left here thinking, and then to complicate matters further, the key question of the 2AR is, does the alt have a better explanation or better explanatory power for why things are getting better? I can't understand what sort of like if that's a burden of the alt, and if it failed, like what that would really, what the impact of that is, particularly given that the two, I think there are two alt. Okay, so let me one more little transition. No, kind of try to wrap this up. So then my question is sort of like, what's the value of what the neg did? I got to this position where I was just sort of like, is there anything of value in what the neg did? And I went carefully read their alternative cards. The Juraman in 13.1 is really good on the subjectivity positionality argument. The neoliberalism of the state consists in its grounding of the subject in homo economicus or whatever, okay? That isn't as meaningful to me as Nieto, which is the other one, which I think kind of unpacked that for me. We should start with the question of the subject and problematize it, because we should try to understand the way that capital, whatever neoliberalism, however you want to put it, simply attempts two things. One, it sets the frame for what counts as controversial, and two, it positions subjects within an ideological grid that constrains the kinds of questions that we can ask. And so that's not a lot, but it ain't nothing. It sounds pretty academic and of relevance, of deep relevance given the, in relation to the rest of the debate, the, huge weighty issues that are here. And I guess at the end of the day, I could not understand what it meant to vote AF, and I thought there was a small but important and intellectually significant net benefit to vote for the neg. That's the quick version.
I thought about a couple of questions, like, is the world improving now or not? And should I vote to say no or take a leap of faith? I read the yes, the world is improving evidence. It wasn't really spectacular to me. I thought it said that the world is getting more peaceful. The Dean evidence says the world is becoming safer and richer. There's less violence. There's less poverty, except for the developing world. The growth decoupling argument's true. I thought they had better reasons for why the world is not really improving now. Brad's like, the world's becoming more homophobic and more racist leaders are taking over. Economic growth increases destructive power. They've got some evidence that violence has been increasing, and it's like a study from 1870 to the 1990s. The increase in trade has increased war and conflict, as well as the rise of democracy. The war machine is just becoming more classist, racist, masculine, and paranoid as a trend. The dynamics of wealth distribution and trade being good are illusory and actually just increase inequality. So then I thought about, can you solve any of your advantages if you just still operate under neoliberalism? They've got some arguments like innovation won't solve the environment because investors just will reinvest in stuff that destroys the environment because of neoliberalism, or the drive for capital will increase war and conflict and not actually cause peace, or this PMC shift argument that people will just pay for security. The plan won't stop the shift because PMCs only wield influence because of neoliberalism. They've got that Adams evidence about this. The only reason PMCs are growing is because of neoliberalism.
neoliberalism. They're also just saying a lot of the whole thesis of economic innovation is a lie that the government is telling us to protect neoliberalism, and that the war on drugs is only possible or inevitable because of neoliberalism. Something that gave me a lot of pause though was like, will the alternative really solve that? I don't know. But if they're right about this framework question that ontology works and predetermines politics, maybe that alt is a leap of faith. And I'm kind of hesitant that it will solve, you're right, but I'm more hesitant that you can solve your AF. So I just decided to try or die negs. How the F could have won my ballot, more on will the alternative really solve though. And we've just got studies that were right, and these are constructs, and these things exist and are not inevitable because of neoliberalism. If that had been more of the 2AR, I probably would have voted F.
I thought the app won this argument that the world is an overshoot, and the only way to avoid collapse is kind of a continual process of innovation. I thought your first argument to respond to this is just like your Robinson card that says we're past the tipping point, and it mostly assigns the blame to capitalism. I don't think there's an argument anywhere in the speeches or the evidence that we can transition social systems and status quo damage won't kill us all. There's like no reverse causal piece of evidence or sufficiency evidence for the alternative. Your second argument is this Piketty card. I don't think this card says that like decentralization, for instance, is bad at producing innovation, or the kind of innovations that their impact evidence is talking about would not work, or they wouldn't be sufficient. It just seems to be talking about preconditions to innovation. Like some people say you have to open up trade to do innovation, but like people will figure out the tech anyway. And I just don't think that's what the app is talking about at all. I think their judgment card was good. And due to 2NR time pressure, I thought there was a risk, although not super high because it's pretty silly, of the second half of the advantage, but there's just like not a lot of ink in the 2NR about the second half of that advantage. But I mostly thought decentralization was pretty okay. The third neg arg is this York treads mills and production card. This card does say the only way to prevent further deterioration is to curb growth. It doesn't really conclude that this would be sustainable. Two cards that are very clear that it would not be. I thought the AF Soisa card, the 1AR one, is just noticeably better than this York card. I think, so that kind of obviated the main thrust of the 2NR impact calc, which is ag and warming stuff. And so trying to digest the other impacts was pretty difficult. Like, so I had this fascism thing and the narcissism stuff. I feel like these two things have the potentiality to cause some violence, but it also seems like this is part of the status quo to some degree. And why I thought about that was because the AF evidence, does the AF evidence assume this? When it says total violence is going down, like where there's obviously some securitization going on, some narcissistic policies, but battle deaths are going down, so does it cause war? Things of that nature. I don't think either the 2NR or 2AR give me a great way to resolve this portion of the debate decisively for either side. I really don't know. I think that democratic peace theory is probably not as true, so I thought that argument neg, but I thought overall violence by a couple different metrics had gone down despite globalization going up. So I thought that was for the AF, so I really have no idea. And there's like no scenario, there's no like this violence outweighs other violence, there's no like discrete war, there's no like war turns the environment. So I don't really know about all that violence stuff. It's kind of nebulous, it doesn't seem as important as extinction, and I don't know who really solved it better than the other side. I thought the AF was ahead, yeah, so I thought the AF being ahead on this extinction level sustainability question and the lack of a 2NR impact framework argument for this value to life thing. I couldn't really bring myself to vote on a more certain risk of extinction to avoid like a security inframing impact that was about like 2 sentences from the 2NR. And it says like, in this regard, human resources are no different from livestock, and with this, an evil worse than death has taken place, which I think our card seemed to respond to that logic. And the 2NR did not really extrapolate or tweak the way I should evaluate this card. So I thought extinction was a little bit more important than this. I thought all the framework arguments were meant to help the alternative solvency, not really reasons to vote neg, even if you lose the neolib is bad. Seems like the alt can't capture this innovation stuff because it's premised on decentralization, which you pretty aggressively said was not a part of your alternative or something you would endorse. So I thought innovation was an independent, it was an external app thing that was key to solve overshoot.
First, I'll say something that I don't think any I feel in the way that a lot of the other judges are talking. This was an extraordinarily difficult debate to resolve. There was like a ton of stuff going on, and it was like the first time judging a debate where I wished that I had followed the speech docs just so that I wasn't playing information catch up after the debate. So there's like an awful lot to process. I think that the overshoot thing was the major problem for me. And I think that if you were to re-give this to an R, think about reframing impact stuff, I might, because of the overshoot problem, start instead with your basic like turns to war stuff as the offense to start with. Because I came perilously close to voting negative on more capital means more money for, private military corporations. And those are really doggone awful. Like I thought that was one area where the AF was pretty behind, because the sort of lots of critiques have the like T violence trick. And I thought that this best one that was underutilized by the negative was the more you talk about conflict and war based on states competing with one another, what are states' reactions to the economic environment going to be, the less you're thinking about how the production of more and more capital itself exists in a direct linear relationship with the amount of violence in the system. So yes, states could lash out or whatever from the transition, but if there are causal arguments about PMCs starting because there's money available from well-heeled military corporations and not from state interests, then more capital equals more of that. And I thought, my main issue with voting on that in the debate was that it was sort of not a huge part of the impact calculus for the 2NR, which focused on the environment things. And I thought that this York evidence was better for you than Lincoln did, in the sense that I think it really did go so far as to say that the reinvestment has the same kind of linear relationship with capital creation and messing with the environment. But the problem is that evidence was written 11 years ago. And so we're saying if there is a substantial problem with overshoot, then how do we resolve what threshold has or hasn't been passed now? And I thought that given the relevance and time that it happened in the debate earlier on the overshoot stuff, that there needed to be a slowdown moment in the 2NR where you were just kind of, okay, like here is one way that we could envision that the environmental catastrophes that have happened, the general structural violence problems that we have are in some way reversible by thinking otherwise. So I think sort of to your detriment, the debate about how we're delinking or how social movements are resisting these problems and crafting alternatives is sort of lost in the web. And it would have been nice to have something to hang the hat on to sort of say, this is a kind of concrete mechanism whereby, just to take one example, it's like the carbon is, already in the damn environment. And so, an overshoot debate and implicit question is just kind of like, how do we like actually reverse, how do we really reverse that problem? So I thought, a lot of what Dan says about the framework question, I think is highly relevant. And I think that, given I think a sort of better, I see what Dan is feeling in that the formal concession of, the framework debate, we don't need to win it, right, often signals don't weigh X, Y, or Z. But in this particular debate, I never, the framework debate was never happening in such a way that I took it to mean don't evaluate the consequences of the instrumental adoption of the plan, so much as I took it to mean, right, think about how it is that the way that the world is discussed, theorized, and thought about, and how that structures what we're sort of what we're encountering, what's possible, what's not possible. And so I think, the framework concession for me would have been enough to win the debate had you also, I think, done, resolved very decisively this question about how awful the world is now and where it's going, right? Rather than kind of fighting them to what to me was a sort of difficult to resolve pseudo draw. And I know that's just like a difficult balance, in the 2NR, given everything that's going on. But such are the tragic choices that we are faced with. So short story, which wasn't because I talked for a while, is that I think there are serious overshoot problems with impacts that exist, and continuing on the treadmill offers the possibility of resolving a host of them, and the ones that are most directly relevant to debate seems to be the ones that may already kind of be happening, which is maybe why the Lincoln suggestion about this value to death and framing stuff could also have been a bigger part of it if you thought the overshoot was going bad, because if overshoot inevitable seriously were in a bad spot, then you could kick out to some sort of ETL thing. Might be kind of a trickier mechanism to handle that stuff.
Yeah, I largely agree with that, and I think that the problem, I had a lot of trouble resolving sections of this debate, largely for reasons other people have already pointed out, that I think there's a lot of competing value claims being made at the impact level of this debate, and there's not really a clear metric at the end of the 2NR or the 2AR for sort of how to deal with the fact that a lot of these are in direct communities, fundamentally impact interface. So a lot of the fact that there's also a lot of direct tension and sort of what metric or heuristic we're supposed to use to sort it. It struck me that the way that this became especially difficult was that there were sections of both what Fitzmyer and Becca said, where I found myself strongly agreeing, and there were things that I considered a lot and thought very seriously and was very close to voting negative on. The problem for me, and I know that's not great to hear, but the problem for me was that I ultimately have trouble with sort of this framework as reason to reject the act maybe being more neoliberal versus sort of solvency for the alternative, coupled with, by the end of the debate, I don't think the explanation of what the alt does is at least clear enough to me vis-a-vis the fact that the act maybe doesn't make it worse as much as continue stuff that's already bad, that I feel comfortable saying, just don't do the act. I think the slightly longer version of that is that I think this sort of framework pivot is a little bit confusing to me, but I do think that it sort of changes the threshold just to the act has to demonstrate that they are not net worse than the status quo, which I think they do have sufficient defense to be things that some metric are getting better. And I think this goes to what Lincoln was saying about the sort of nebulous violence claims and what to do with those. I think that the other big thing was that the sort of what PJ was talking about with the mismatch between the ultimate 2NR impact framings about the sort of environmental destruction, mass level, affects lots of people sort of impact style, where I felt sort of the description of neoliberalism as a system that's hurting people and sort of the military, getting the money sort of by private militaries being a bad thing, and all these sort of descriptions that Becca's pointing out, I think are descriptive of the status quo in a lot of ways, and absent sort of a description of the impact in terms of why that individual violence is something that should be prioritized, or the fact that maybe the world is okay, the act doesn't make it net worse, makes it difficult to weigh those or assess them in terms of one another. So I ultimately sort of felt that absent sort of a better explanation of the alternative, I don't really know how to resolve those things. So even if I am skeptical of some of the app's ability to solve, or skeptical about the goodness of neoliberalism, which I certainly am, I just don't feel comfortable enough to not at least stay on the treadmill. And the sort of overshoot question is the short version.
So one of the questions that I have is that I thought that the 2NR was actually very clear on the notion that framework means there is no connection between a ballot for the affirmative and any sort of meaningful politics, which I think is most directly related to your claim, Paul. Because I think I made that, I probably even repeated myself too many times when I said there's a severance between the ballot and any sort of meaningful political action. So in that world where that's true, right, we are totally boned right now, or we're in a bad situation. They don't get to solve their innovation question, which is what you're granting them solvency for on the impact level, which means they don't resolve the global warming thing. The only impact that anyone has a chance of solving is the neoliberal question, any of the impacts that we've isolated. So I guess why do they have access to any sort of implementation of their politics? They might have access to the continued status quo, but it seems like everyone agrees that we've won some arguments why the status quo is bad. Yeah, I don't know, maybe walk me through that.
Well, I mean, I think it would presume, right, the severance between the two things would presume, right, the truth and totality of your thesis, right, in the sense that
because they said they're very clear about this. They're like, no, nothing happens when you vote for us. It's just a thought experiment. And we're like, well, you've conceded that your thought experiment does nothing. So I don't understand. I'm just baffled by how they could still win, that they resolve these macro level problems to any extent whatsoever.
Well, I mean, I know the point is this is something that like Mike Eber said years ago, and I've never like been able to think my way out of it, is that everything is a thought experiment. You know what I mean? So to say don't consider the thing that, right, the proposal that they've made with regards to institutions, right, because there, right, is a disconnect between space of the debate and other world out there, okay, like if it's true that everything that's happening in this particular space, right, accords with the theory of the world that your critique has proffered, right, then it does make sense to not consider any of those other kinds of consequences, because they're all consequences of, right, the ideological enframing. But in a debate where there is a fight, to at least a draw on questions about direction of world and how it exists, for example, right, then that means that, right, that the space is not totally constrained by, right, the things
but not only did they say that, I don't think they did any work to justify an interpretation of the debate in that way. Which is, there's not a line in the 2AR where he's like, well, this is why our method connects to the impact. I agree that there's a lot of clash on the impact level, but I thought we were dramatically ahead on this question of, does your politics have any chance of doing anything in the world? I don't think there's an answer to that in the 2AR.
You mean the politics in the sense of the epistemic approach.
Well, so I guess what I'm saying is that there's two kinds of solvency that we're talking about in this debate. One level is the solvency of a particular performance of a thought experiment, right? The second is the solvency of the implementation of the thought inside of the sort of idealized world. Well, I agree that they might solve in the implementation of that thought experiment, but I feel like we severed successfully the notion that the performance does anything to impact the likelihood of that ideal world coming into being. I just don't think there's an answer.
You're saying the fact that the thing doesn't occur means don't worry about it.
The fact that the thing doesn't occur and that we have offense to the thinking about it is a reason that you shouldn't keep thinking about it.
Yeah. Okay, but if the thinking about it is connected to, right, and an advantage claim, right, one which in part demonstrates that there are issues with the totality of your thesis, right, then that kind of creates kind of a chicken egg conundrum, right? I mean, I feel the frustration.
I mean, the 2AR literally goes there and it's like, okay, we'll concede that there's no correspondence between these two things, which I think renders that problematic, because they're not like, oh, this might influence us in particular ways that allow us to change the world outside. They're literally like, it doesn't matter, you're just here.
And it's not like we've ever said we just don't do anything. Our argument is that the ontological criticism allows us to productively engage in the world. Now, I get that I never said what that would be, but why have less, belief in that than a completely conceded non-method?
I'm just confused why, if neoliberalism is not bad, then why I would do all of that rejecting stuff, because
there's a value to the criticism, but not the.
Why is the value of the criticism if it makes it so we can't do decentralized?
Well, okay, but that presumes that they want every element of the link to it, and it's only a sort of one-way train to capitalist utopia. But I think even in your own decision, you've indicated there's a lot of tension there in the types of violence that might occur, the types of wars that might occur, the conflicts between those wars and the environmental crisis that is sort of real bad. I mean, obviously this is a bigger debate than happened, but I don't understand why there's any sense that that endorsing their thing does a good.
I mean, for me, and maybe this is just it's a big debate, there's lots going on, and there are implicit linkages I'm supposed to be making that I'm not. But I have that argument in the 2AR, you're like, there's not a link between the act value and the real world action, and I have the sort of Welsh description of, ontology predetermines policy. The issue that I had is similar, but phrased, I guess, in terms of how I processed it, was just that I did not have, or at least enough of the sort of connection between the things as to why the fact that if their thing is bad, thought experiment, don't do it, and the sort of value of the ontological position itself.
Well, that's where the Mitchell evidence is important, because the Mitchell evidence is like, well, if we can't do anything, we shouldn't live in fear of this world that we can't involve ourselves.
And I get this.
I mean, that really connection wasn't super explicit, but there was no answer to the parts, right? Like the parts are okay.
I get the parts are okay. What I'm saying is, at least for the way that it ended up being sorted out, I agree with you that I was puzzled and had trouble sorting out the thing that happened there. But what ended up happening was that my sort of making of that not narrative, now hearing the sort of longer explanation of it makes far more sense to me. But it was hard to sort of sort through all that and create that narrative at the time. So it's possible that your correct pieces all put together in that way makes that argument make sense. I think that, and potentially you all maybe disagree with me, I had trouble assembling that narrative from those pieces in that exact way.
Last question, I apologize for arguing with one. I thought that the narcissism arguments problematized much more largely the ability of the app to solve the innovation thing, like the innovation that leads to tech transfer. We made arguments that I'm pretty sure were almost entirely dropped into AR, that narcissism destroys the belief that you should have that the modeling of America is a totally successful one, that it doesn't lead to sort of one-to-one transfer of our institutions to other nations, that there's no real reason you should assume that those things happen unproblematically. I also thought that sort of the fascism uniqueness argument wasn't really responded besides this like abstract notion that yeah, things are just getting better. But their things are getting better cards mostly about the environment and about like maybe peace going down. I thought I actually did some debating on that question, whereas they did no debating on that question. So like why is, I mean, it's still the same question at the end of the day, but like, why are we presuming that the status quo politics are getting better in a way that resolves the terminal, like, theoretical arguments, right? Like, they've won that capitalism could, yes, create environmental movements that create innovation and solve the global crisis. What answers do they have that there are sort of structural determining uniqueness problems that will never access those solutions?
Well, I think this might need to be I think this needs to be a point that's where there's just a little more debating, right? Like, for example, I think their card seems to me to be talking mostly in terms of like, you know, geopolitics, wars, body counts, like quality of life. You know, like there's never really a slowdown moment where you're kind of like, hey, you know, maybe those things have kind of been improving in the short run, right? And we're attracted to them as, right, explanations for what's happening, right? To sort of deny the big crash that's coming that our impact evidence is talking about. Or to say, look, if they're going to concede in this debate, right, that like kind of like we've already overshot because of capitalism, that seems to raise a really big question also about the truth of that. I just think that you need to like blow that argument up more and just be like no.
What about the sort of first part of the question, to maybe simplify or concretize it? It's like narcissism is case defense against the modeling claim on innovation. And you seem to have granted, all of you seem to have granted them, you know, a significant weight. I think they totally dropped this narcissism argument. I like the mentioned it all. Case defense, drop case defense, like.
And it does have a conceded impact argument for the Baumeister card says extinction via nuclear war. I don't know, there's just like so many problems.
I didn't have that part of it, that second element of it, and perhaps.
Okay.
Yeah. Potentially, like, willing to admit that maybe that's there. Usually I'm a pretty good flip. So, but I do think that in terms of the case defense argument, I think that I guess for me it was sort of a question of the alternative. It's like, even if sort of it's read through that lens, it just seems indicative of the status quo, which goes back to sort of the previous question for me. Anyways, it's like, I agree.
If it's a question of the alternative.
It's entirely separate from the question of
the plan has no question, right? Because the plan doesn't do anything. If the world, okay, it's fine. We're in circles. I'll never resolve this question. But I appreciate everyone judging us. Thank you. Thanks for joining.